Greetings, fellow fans. You're tuned into Muse Fanfiction, presenting to you today, what if Harry found an ancient contract at age 8 that made him the legal owner of the Ministry of Magic? Show some love by liking and subscribing. Enjoy the story ahead. Chapter 1, The Parchment Beneath the Stone. The spider was back. Harry watched it crawl along the underside of the stair above his head, picking its way between the nails that poked through the wood like crooked teeth. He'd named this one Margaret, after Aunt Petunia's friend who came for tea on Thursdays and always looked at Harry like he was something stuck to her shoe. Margaret the spider didn't judge him, though. She just went about her business, building webs in corners, catching flies, living her small life 3 feet above his face. It was a good life, Harry thought. Better than his, anyway. His ribs ached. Not the sharp, bright pain of something broken. He'd learned the difference 2 years ago, but the deep, spreading kind that meant bruises were settling in. Dudley had been in rare form today. Something about a video game that wouldn't work, which had somehow become Harry's fault despite the fact that Harry had been outside weeding the garden at the time. Vernon had grabbed him by the collar, shaken him until his teeth rattled, and thrown him into the cupboard with instructions not to make a sound until morning. It was 7:30. Morning was a long way off. Harry shifted on his thin mattress, trying to find a position where nothing pressed against the worst of the bruises, and his elbow knocked against the wall. A piece of plaster crumbled and fell onto his blanket in a puff of white dust. He froze. Any noise at all, and Vernon would come back. The man had ears like a bat when it came to sounds from the cupboard, though he could somehow sleep through Dudley's television blaring at full volume 2 rooms away. Harry held his breath. The house stayed quiet, the muffled drone of the evening news, Dudley's distant laughter, the clink of dishes as Petunia cleaned up the dinner Harry hadn't been allowed to eat. He let the breath out slowly and looked at the wall where his elbow had struck. The plaster had been crumbling for months in that spot, a patch just behind where his pillow sat, low near the floor. He'd noticed it getting worse but hadn't paid attention. Now, in the thin strip of light bleeding under the cupboard door, he could see that the fallen plaster had revealed something underneath. Not the usual brick or wooden frame. Something darker. A gap. Harry's curiosity had survived the Dursleys in a way that nothing else about his childhood had. They could starve it, lock it up, try to beat it out of him, but it always came back, stubborn as a weed growing through concrete. He reached out and brushed more plaster away, carefully, quietly, feeling along the edges of the gap with his fingertips. It was a hole. A proper one, about the size of his fist, hidden behind a loose stone in the wall's foundation. The stone wiggled when he touched it, and he worked it free with the patience of a boy who had nothing but time. It came out with a soft scrape, and cool air breathed against his fingers from the space behind it. Something was in there. He reached in, expecting, what? A dead mouse, maybe. Old insulation. Something mundane and disappointing, like everything else in his life. His fingers touched something smooth and dry. Not paper, not quite. It felt older than paper, stiffer, with a texture like very fine leather. He got his fingers around it and pulled it out. A scroll. An actual scroll, like something from a museum, rolled tight and bound with a cord that looked like it was made of braided metal, gold and silver twisted together. The cord was tied in a knot that seemed too complex for its size, loops within loops, and where the knot sat, there was a seal. A mark pressed into something that wasn't wax. It was hard, dark red, almost black, and it was warm. Harry held the scroll up to the light leaking under the door. The seal bore an image he couldn't quite make out, shapes within shapes, what might have been animals or symbols or letters in a language he didn't know. But the warmth was unmistakable. The scroll was warm the way a living thing was warm, like holding a bird in cupped hands. "What are you?" Harry whispered. The seal pulsed. Just once, a flare of heat and light, gold light, rich and deep, nothing like electricity or fire, and the cord fell away as if the knot had simply decided to stop existing. The scroll unrolled in his hands. He couldn't read it. The text was dense, written in dark ink that seemed to shift and move on the parchment, and the language was nothing he'd ever seen. Latin, maybe, or something older. But as he stared at it, squinting in the bad light, the words began to change. Not all at once. It was like watching ice melt, the strange characters softened at their edges, blurred, reformed. English bled through, word by word, sentence by sentence, as though the document was translating itself for him. Herein is set forth the covenant of governance for the magical peoples of the British Isles, established in the year 1189 by common agreement of the founding families. Harry read. He read slowly, because the language was still old and formal even in English, full of words he didn't know and structures that made his 8-year-old brain work harder than it had ever worked in school. But he read, and he understood enough. The scroll was a contract. A magical contract, whatever that meant, signed by a group of families who had apparently created something called the Ministry of Magic. The contract laid out the rules for how this ministry would work, who would lead it, and what would happen if it failed in its duties. Most of it went over his head. Clauses about equitable representation of magical bloodlines, and custodial obligations to the non-magical populace, and stewardship of lay confluences and sites of elder power. But one section, near the end, was written in larger text, and the ink was a different color, deep red, almost the same shade as the seal. Should the institution herein established fall to corruption beyond the consent of the governed, should it fail in its sacred charge to protect, to serve, and to preserve the rights of all magical peoples within its jurisdiction, the authority vested in the ministry shall revert to the bloodline of the last signatory, to be held in trust until such time as governance is restored to its proper purpose. The last signatory of this covenant is Ignotus Peveril. Below the name was a mark, not a signature but a symbol. A triangle, bisected by a line, with a circle at its center. And below that, in text that looked freshly written, as if the ink were still wet, the line of Peveril continues. The blood recognizes the heir. The covenant awaits activation. Place your blood upon the seal. Harry's heart was hammering. This was mad. This was completely, absolutely mad. He was 8 years old, lying in a cupboard under the stairs, reading a magical scroll that was asking for his blood. In any sensible universe, he would roll the thing back up, shove it in the hole, replace the stone, and go to sleep. Harry had never lived in a sensible universe. He thought about it for all of 10 seconds. Then he bit his thumb, hard, the way he'd learned to do quietly after Dudley's gang had started playing their favorite game of Harry hunting, and pressed the bead of blood that welled up against the dark red seal at the bottom of the scroll. The world went white. Not painful white. Not blinding. It was the white of the inside of a cloud, vast and depthless, and Harry felt like he was floating in it. He couldn't feel his body, couldn't feel the thin mattress or the hard floor or the ache in his ribs. He just existed, suspended in light, and a voice spoke to him. Not in words, exactly. It was more like knowledge being poured directly into his mind, like water into a cup. He understood things he hadn't understood before. The contract was real. Magic was real. He was magic, a wizard, born from a long line of wizards, and the blood in his veins carried the authority of the oldest magical covenant in Britain. The Ministry of Magic was a government. A whole hidden government, with departments and laws and courts and a prison, operating in secret alongside the world Harry knew. And it had been operating in violation of its founding charter for centuries. The protections for non-magical born witches and wizards had eroded. The rights of non-human magical beings had been stripped away. The institution had become a tool for the powerful to maintain their power, and the contract had been waiting, patient, ancient, certain, for the heir who would set it right. Harry was that heir. The whiteness receded slowly, like a tide going out, and Harry found himself back in his cupboard, on his mattress, holding the scroll. But things were different. He could feel it in his chest, behind his ribs, a warmth that had nothing to do with temperature. Something had taken root there, something vast and old and patient, and it was his. The scroll had changed too. Below the section about the last signatory, new text had appeared, the covenant is activated. Harry James Potter, heir of Peveril, is recognized as sovereign owner of the Ministry of Magic, with all rights, authorities, and obligations therein. The sovereign's authority is absolute and irrevocable. It may be challenged only by unanimous vote of the founding families, of which none survive in full. The covenant's magic shall protect the sovereign from harm and shall enforce his edicts upon the institution. So it is written. So it is bound. Harry stared at the words until they blurred. Then he did something he couldn't remember doing in a very long time. He laughed. It wasn't a loud laugh, he hadn't forgotten where he was, but it was real, a sound that bubbled up from somewhere deep and surprised him with its existence. He pressed his hand over his mouth and laughed until his eyes watered, because the universe had apparently looked at a skinny, bruised 8-year-old locked in a cupboard and said, "Here. Have a government." "Okay," Harry whispered to the empty cupboard. "Okay." He didn't sleep that night. He read the scroll 3 more times, and each time he read it, he understood more. Not because the language changed, but because the contract's magic was doing something to his mind, not controlling it, not rewriting it, but opening it, like a door being unlocked. He could think more clearly. He could remember things with precision he'd never had before. The fog that had always seemed to hang over his thoughts, the dullness that made school hard and made the Dursleys call him stupid, was lifting. By morning, when Petunia's sharp knuckles rapped on the cupboard door, Harry had made 3 decisions. First, he was not going to tell anyone about this. Not yet. Not until he understood what he was dealing with. Second, he was going to learn everything he could about the magical world he apparently belonged to. Third, he was never going to be afraid of the Dursleys again. The third decision was tested immediately. He opened the cupboard door to find Vernon standing in the hallway, thick arms crossed, meaty face already red at 7 in the morning. "You'll do the garden today, boy. All of it. Front and back. And if I find a single weed when I get home, sure," Harry said. Vernon blinked. Harry never interrupted him. Harry never responded with anything but a mumbled, "Yes, Uncle Vernon," and downcast eyes. The single syllable, delivered with quiet calm, threw the big man off his rhythm. "What did you say?" "I said sure. I'll do the garden." Harry looked up at his uncle, and something in his eyes must have been different, because Vernon took a half-step back. It was tiny, involuntary, the instinct of a creature encountering something it didn't understand. "Can I have breakfast first?" Vernon's face went from red to purple. "You'll eat when I say you eat, I'll do a better job with breakfast," Harry said. "That's just practical." The silence stretched. Petunia had appeared at the end of the hallway, dish towel in hand, watching with an expression Harry had never seen on her face before. It looked almost like recognition. Like she was seeing something she'd seen before, a long time ago, in someone else. "Fine," Vernon grunted. "Toast. 1 slice. And get to work." Harry ate his toast, 2 slices, because he took the second one when Petunia's back was turned and she pretended not to notice, and went out to the garden. While he weeded, he thought. The contract's magic hummed in his chest like a second heartbeat, steady and warm, and his newly sharpened mind turned the problem over and over. He needed information. He needed to know what the Ministry of Magic was, how it worked, who ran it, and how badly it had gone wrong. He needed to understand the magical world before he could do anything about owning a piece of it. But he was 8, he lived with Muggles, the scroll's word for non-magical people, and he had no idea how to access the world that was apparently his birthright. The scroll had mentioned something about that, though. A clause near the middle, about the sovereign's right to summon servants of the institution. Harry hadn't fully understood it, but the gist was clear enough. The ministry had employees, and those employees were magically bound to answer the sovereign's call. That night, after the Dursleys were asleep, Harry sat cross-legged on his mattress with the scroll in his lap and did what the contract told him to do. He pressed his thumb to the seal, the cut had healed, but the seal recognized him anyway, flaring warm and gold at his touch, and spoke in a whisper. "I need someone from the ministry. Someone who can explain things. Someone trustworthy." For a long moment, nothing happened. Then the air in the cupboard shifted. It got heavier, charged, the way it felt before a thunderstorm, and with a soft pop that sounded like a cork being pulled from a bottle, someone appeared. Not a person. Something smaller, thinner, with enormous green eyes and bat-like ears and wearing what appeared to be a pillowcase fashioned into a toga. It blinked at Harry, blinked at the cupboard, and its enormous eyes somehow got even bigger. "The sovereign calls," it said, in a voice like a rusty hinge. Griphook told Dobby the old magic was stirring, but Dobby did not believe. "The sovereign is a child." "I'm Harry," Harry said. "And yeah, I'm a child." "Are you from the ministry?" The creature, Dobby, apparently, wrung its hands. "Dobby is a house elf, sir. Dobby works in the ministry's maintenance division." Dobby felt the call of the covenant and was compelled to answer, "Sir, though Dobby's master will be most displeased, you have a master." "I thought you worked for the ministry." "Dobby is bound to the Malfoy family, sir. But the covenant's call supersedes all other bonds. This is old magic, sir. The oldest." Dobby's enormous eyes were fixed on Harry with an intensity that was almost uncomfortable. "The sovereign truly is a child." Dobby had expected, well, Dobby did not know what to expect. But not this. "Join the club," Harry said. "Sit down, Dobby. I've got questions." Dobby sat. He perched on the edge of Harry's mattress like a bird on a wire, tense and trembling, and Harry understood that the trembling wasn't fear of him but fear of everything, of his master, of being discovered, of a world that had apparently treated house elves about as well as the Dursleys treated Harry. "First question," Harry said. "What's the Ministry of Magic and how does it work?" Dobby told him. It took hours, and Dobby's understanding was that of a maintenance worker, heavy on the practical, light on the political, but it was enough. The ministry was headquartered in London, underground. It had departments for everything from magical law enforcement to the regulation of magical creatures. It was run by a minister for magic, currently a man named Cornelius Fudge, who was by Dobby's account, a man of much smiling and little doing. There was a legislative and judicial body called the Wisengamot, made up of old families and appointed officials, which passed laws and tried criminals. And there was a school, Hogwarts, where young witches and wizards learned magic, run by a man named Albus Dumbledore, who was apparently the most powerful wizard alive. "And the contract," Harry said. "The covenant. Do people at the ministry know about it?" Dobby shook his head so hard his ears flapped. "The covenant is old, sir. Forgotten by most. Some of the oldest families may know legends, but no one believes the sovereign's line still lives. The Potters were known to be of Peveril descent, but Sir," Dobby hesitated. "Sir is Harry Potter. That's what they tell me." Dobby made a sound like a teakettle about to burst. "Harry Potter. The boy who lived. Dobby is speaking with Harry Potter. In a cupboard." "Keep your voice down," Harry hissed. "The boy who lived." Dobby told him that too. About Voldemort, the name made the elf flinch so hard he nearly fell off the mattress, and about Harry's parents, and about the night a killing curse had bounced off a baby's forehead and ended the darkest wizard in a century. Harry sat very still for a long time after Dobby finished. "My parents," he said slowly. "They were murdered." "Yes, sir. And the Dursleys told me they died in a car crash." That is not accurate, sir." "No. It isn't." Harry's voice was quiet, but something had changed in it, a coldness settling in alongside the calm. "My parents were heroes, and I was put here. In a cupboard. With people who hate me." Dobby's eyes were shining with tears. "Dobby is sorry, sir. Dobby is so sorry." "Don't be sorry. Be useful." Harry looked at the elf. Can you bring me things? Books? Documents? I need to learn, Dobby. About everything. Magic, the ministry, the law, all of it. Dobby can bring things, sir. But Dobby must be careful. Dobby's master, your master is going to become a problem I deal with later, Harry said. For now, just bring me what you can, when you can. Anything about magical law. Anything about the Wisengamot. History. Theory. Whatever you can find without getting caught. Dobby nodded rapidly. Dobby will do this. Dobby will help the sovereign. Dobby has waited, all house elves have waited, for the old magic to wake up. He looked at Harry with something that was more than loyalty, more than obedience. It was hope. The Covenant was supposed to protect all magical creatures, sir. Not just wizards. House elves were promised freedom and fair treatment. That promise was broken centuries ago. Then that's the first thing I fix, Harry said, and he meant it with every fiber of his being. When I'm ready. When I know enough to do it right. Dobby left with a pop, and Harry sat alone in his cupboard with the warmth of the Covenant burning in his chest and a dead man's legacy on his shoulders. He was 8 years old, he was bruised and underfed, and he owned a government. Time to get to work. The next 3 years were the busiest of Harry's life. Dobby came back 2 nights later with a stack of books that shouldn't have fit in the cupboard but did, because, as Harry was learning, magic didn't care much about the laws of physics. A History of Magic by Bathilda Bagshot. The Standard Book of Spells, Grade 1 by Miranda Goshawk. Magical Theory by Adalbert Waffling. And, most valuable of all, a thick, dusty volume with no author listed on the spine, The Complete Charter and Bylaws of the Ministry of Magic, annotated. Harry read them all. The Covenant's magic helped, his memory was sharper, his comprehension faster, his ability to draw connections between disparate facts almost supernatural. But the magic didn't do the work for him. It just made him capable of doing it himself. He still had to read every page, think through every argument, understand every precedent. He read by wand light. That was Dobby's second gift, not a wand, but a small crystal that produced light when squeezed, enchanted for use by house elves in the ministry's darker corridors. Harry kept it hidden in his pillowcase during the day and used it at night, reading until his eyes burned and then reading some more. By the time he was 9, he knew more about magical law than most ministry employees. By the time he was 10, he understood the political landscape, the factions, the alliances, the pressure points. He knew that Cornelius Fudge was a puppet who danced for whoever pulled his strings hardest, usually Lucius Malfoy. He knew that Dumbledore controlled the Wisengamot through a combination of genuine respect and careful manipulation. He knew that the ministry's treatment of so-called half-breeds and dark creatures was not just unjust but a direct violation of the original Covenant. And he knew that the Covenant gave him the power to do something about all of it. The contract's magic had other effects too. As Harry studied, as he grew, the Covenant's protections manifested in subtle ways. Vernon's rages became less violent, not because the man had grown a conscience, but because something stopped him every time he raised his hand, a pressure in the air, an instinct that said don't. Dudley's gang found that their attempts at Harry hunting met with increasingly unlikely obstacles, shoelaces that tied themselves together, puddles that appeared from nowhere, a memorable incident where Piers Polkiss ran headlong into a lamppost that Piers swore hadn't been there a second ago. Harry still did chores. He still lived in the cupboard. He chose to, it was easier to hide his studies, and he didn't want to tip the Dursleys off that anything had changed. But the dynamic had shifted. He wasn't a victim anymore. He was a strategist biding his time, and the cupboard was his war room. Dobby came regularly, smuggling books and documents and gossip from the ministry. Through the elf, Harry learned the day-to-day reality of magical government, the bribes, the backroom deals, the casual cruelty toward anyone without the right blood or the right connections. Dobby also brought newspapers, the Daily Prophet, and Harry read them cover to cover, building a picture of the world he was about to enter. He noticed patterns. The Prophet never criticized fudge. It never investigated corruption. It ran puff pieces about pureblood families and scare stories about werewolves and giants and muggleborns getting above themselves. It was a propaganda machine, and Harry filed that knowledge away for later. On his 10th birthday, Harry summoned Dobby and asked a question he'd been sitting on for months. The contract says the Sovereign can formally file a claim with the Department of Magical Law Enforcement. What does that actually look like? Dobby's ears perked up. Sir is ready. I'm asking what ready looks like. The Sovereign would present the covenant to the department head and invoke the clause of reclamation. The department is magically bound to process the claim. They cannot refuse, sir. The old magic compels them. And then the Sovereign's authority becomes a matter of public record. The minister, the Wisengamot, they would all be formally notified. Harry leaned back against the wall of his cupboard. And they'd fight it. Fudge, the old families, everyone with something to lose. Undoubtedly, sir. Can they win? The covenant is absolute, sir. It predates the ministry itself. No law passed by the Wisengamot can override it, because the Wisengamot derives its authority from the covenant. They could challenge on grounds of identity, claim Sir is not truly of the Peveril line, but the blood seal has already confirmed Sir's heritage. They could challenge on grounds of the corruption clause, argue that the ministry is not, in fact, corrupt, but... Dobby trailed off and gave Harry a look of pure, undiluted skepticism. But good luck with that, Harry finished. Precisely, sir. Harry thought for a long time. The candle, he'd graduated from the squeeze light to proper candles, nicked from Petunia's emergency supply, flickered and cast dancing shadows on the cupboard walls. I don't want to file the claim yet, he said finally. I'll be 11 next year. I'll get my Hogwarts letter. I want to enter the magical world properly first. Meet people. Understand the terrain. And then, sir. Then I walk into the ministry and tell them who I am. Harry's lips curved in a small, sharp smile. But between now and then, I want to lay groundwork. Can you get me a meeting with someone at Gringotts? The goblins? Dobby nearly fell off the mattress. Gringotts, sir. The goblins they are difficult, sir. Proud. They do not deal willingly with wizards. That's because wizards treat them like servants. The covenant doesn't. I read the original charter for Gringotts' relationship with the ministry. The goblins were supposed to be equal partners in magical governance. That promise was broken too. Harry met Dobby's eyes. I want to keep it. Something happened on Dobby's face that Harry had never seen on any face directed at him before. It wasn't gratitude or hope or loyalty. It was belief. The elf looked at this skinny 10-year-old boy sitting in a cupboard under the stairs and believed in him with every ounce of his being. Dobby will arrange it, sir. The meeting with the goblins happened on a Saturday in October when the Dursleys were at an autumn fair. Dobby brought Harry directly to a private chamber in Gringotts, side-along apparition, which felt like being squeezed through a tube of toothpaste and was exactly as unpleasant as it sounded. The chamber was deep underground, carved from living rock, and the goblin waiting for him was old. Not just old but ancient, with a face like a walnut and eyes like black diamonds and hands that had counted gold before the ministry existed. Ragnarok, the goblin said, by way of introduction. Director of Gringotts. I am told you carry the covenant. Harry set the scroll on the stone table between them. I do. Ragnarok didn't touch it. He examined it with his eyes, leaning close, and Harry saw the moment the goblin recognized the seal. Something shifted in that ancient face, surprise, quickly controlled, and beneath it a hunger that Harry understood instinctively. Not greed. Hunger for justice. For promises kept. The clause of mutual stewardship, Ragnarok said quietly. Paragraph 47. The Goblin Nation was guaranteed sovereign control of its financial institutions, with no ministry oversight or interference. That clause was violated in 1631 with the passage of the Banking Regulation Act. I know, Harry said. I've read it. Ragnock looked up from the scroll. His black eyes were unreadable. You are a child. I am. Does that matter? It matters in the sense that children grow. They change. They make promises they cannot keep. I'm not making promises, Harry said. The Covenant already made them. I'm just the one who's going to enforce them. The question is whether Gringotts wants to help me do that, or whether you'd rather wait another 8 centuries for the next heir. Silence filled the stone chamber. Ragnock studied Harry with the patience of a creature that measured time in centuries, and Harry sat still and let himself be studied. He didn't fidget. He didn't look away. The Covenant hummed in his chest, a quiet reminder that he belonged here, in this room, having this conversation, even if he was 10 years old and wearing Dudley's hand-me-downs 3 sizes too large. What do you want from Gringotts? Ragnock asked. 3 things. First, I want to access the Potter family vault. I know my parents left me assets, and I'll need resources. Second, I want Gringotts to independently verify the Covenant's authenticity. When I file my claim with the Ministry, Fudge will try to say it's a forgery. Having the goblins confirm it's real will cut that argument off at the knees. Third, Harry paused. Third, I want an alliance. Not servitude. Not a transaction. A partnership between the Sovereign and the Goblin Nation, as the Covenant originally intended. Ragnock was quiet for a very long time. Then the old goblin smiled. It was not a warm smile, goblins didn't do warm, but it was real, and it was fierce, and it showed a lot of very sharp teeth. I have waited 400 years for a wizard to say those words, Ragnock said. You have your alliance, Harry Potter. They talked for 3 hours. By the end, Harry had access to the Potter vault, which contained considerably more gold than he'd expected, enough to fund a small war if necessary, and Ragnock had assigned a personal account manager, a sharp young goblin named Griphook, to handle Harry's affairs. The Covenant was submitted for authentication, a process involving ancient goblin magic that would produce an unassailable verification within the month. Harry also learned something that Dobby hadn't known. The Potter family wasn't just old. It was one of the oldest magical families in Britain, with ties to the Peverils that went back to the 13th century. The family had been wealthy, powerful, and politically active for generations, until James and Lily Potter had been murdered and their infant son had been deposited on a Muggle doorstep. Your magical guardian is listed as Albus Dumbledore, Griphook told him, reviewing the Potter account records. He sealed the family vault after your parents' death and arranged for a small trust vault to fund your education at Hogwarts. The main vault has been untouched for 10 years. Dumbledore sealed my vault, Harry repeated. On whose authority? His own, as chief warlock of the Wizengamot and self-appointed magical guardian. The paperwork is minimal. Harry filed that away too. Another piece of the puzzle. Another person who had made decisions about his life without asking. Dobby took him home before the Dursleys returned. Harry climbed back into his cupboard with a pouch of galleons hidden in the loose stone behind his pillow and a head full of plans. The warmth of the Covenant pulsed in his chest, and for the first time, it felt less like a burden and more like an engine. 6 months later, he turned 11. The letter came on a Tuesday. Harry watched from the kitchen window as a tawny owl dropped it through the mail slot. He'd known it was coming, of course, had known for months, and picked it up before Petunia could reach the hallway. Mr. H. Potter, The Cupboard Under the Stairs, 4, Privet Drive, Little Whinging, Surrey. My school letter, Harry said, holding it up as Petunia rounded the corner. She went white. Dead white, the color of old bone, and her hand came up to her mouth. How did, I know what I am, Aunt Petunia. I know what my parents were. I know what you've done. Harry said it without anger, without heat. Just facts, delivered calmly. I'm going to Hogwarts. I'm going to need some things. And when I leave this house, I'm not coming back. Vernon appeared behind Petunia, drawn by the disruption to his morning routine. What's all this? What's the boy on about? I'm a wizard, Harry said. I've been accepted to a school for wizards. And I'm leaving. You will not, Vernon. Harry looked at his uncle, and the Covenant's magic rose in his chest like a tide. He didn't do anything with it, didn't push it outward, but it was there in his eyes, in his voice, in the absolute unshakable certainty of his bearing. You have no power over me. You never really did. But now we both know it. Vernon Dursley opened his mouth. Closed it. Opened it again. And then, for the first and last time in his life, he had nothing to say. He turned and walked back into the kitchen, and Harry heard him sit down heavily at the table and pick up his newspaper with shaking hands. Petunia lingered. She was looking at Harry with that expression again, recognition, memory, something that might have been guilt buried under years of bitterness. You look like your mother, she said quietly. When you do that. When you stand like that. Good, Harry said. And then, because he wasn't cruel even to people who'd been cruel to him, he added, I won't tell anyone how you treated me. Not because you deserve protection, but because I have bigger things to deal with. Goodbye, Aunt Petunia. He went to his cupboard and packed what little he owned. The scroll went inside his shirt, against his skin, where its warmth was a constant companion. He had money, he had knowledge, he had a plan. Everything else he could get along the way. 2 days later, Harry Potter walked into Diagon Alley for the first time, and the magical world met its owner. He'd arranged it through Griphook, no giant gamekeeper escort for him, no wide-eyed stumble through an unfamiliar world. He entered through the leaky cauldron wearing new clothes bought with owl-ordered galleons and an expression of calm purpose that made people step out of his way without quite knowing why. Diagon Alley was everything the books had described and more. The colors, the sounds, the sheer impossible magic of it, shops with windows that displayed moving photographs, owls circling overhead, a group of children pressing their faces against the glass of a broomstick shop. Harry allowed himself a moment to just stand and take it in, to feel the wonder of it, because he was 11 and this was wondrous and no amount of strategic planning could completely override the fact that a boy was seeing magic for the first time. Then he got to work. Gringotts first. Griphook met him in the lobby and escorted him to Ragnarok's office, where the Covenant's authentication papers were waiting, sealed with the Goblin Nation's official mark, unassailable as evidence. You're filing today? Ragnarok asked. Not today. I need to buy my school things, get a wand, settle into the magical world. I file after I'm at Hogwarts. I want to be established there first, with allies, before I light this particular fire. Ragnarok's sharp-toothed smile appeared again. Strategic. Good. I'm not in a rush, Harry said. The ministry's been broken for centuries. A few more weeks won't matter. What matters is doing it right. From Gringotts, he went shopping. Books first, not just the Hogwarts list but additional texts on magical law, politics, and history. Then supplies. Then Madame Malkin's for robes, where a pale blonde boy with a pointed face was already being fitted. More actions continue, Hogwarts 2. The blonde boy asked, eyeing Harry in the mirror as Madame Malkin directed him onto the fitting stool. That's right, Harry said. First year. My father wanted me to go to Durmstrang, but mother insisted on Hogwarts. Tradition, you know. The boy had a drawl that was clearly inherited, practiced, the voice of someone raised to believe every room he entered belonged to him. I'm Malfoy. Draco Malfoy. Harry knew exactly who this was. Lucius Malfoy's son. The heir to the family that kept Dobby in chains. He could feel the sharp edge of dislike pressing against his ribs, but he kept it off his face. This was a child, not his father. And even if the boy turned out to be a perfect copy of Lucius, information was always more valuable than an enemy made too early. "Harry Potter," he said. Draco's composure cracked. Just slightly, a widening of the eyes, a fractional drop of the jaw, before the mask snapped back into place. Good mask for an 11-year-old. But Harry had been wearing one since he was 8. "Harry Potter," Draco repeated. "Well. Father will be very interested to hear, I'm sure he will. What's Durmstrang like?" The deflection worked. Draco was the kind of boy who loved talking about things he knew, and Harry let him talk while Madame Malkin pinned and measured and tutored. He filed away everything, the casual references to dark arts education, the reverence for pure-blood traditions, the way Draco's voice changed when he mentioned his father, shifting from arrogance to something more complicated. Fear, maybe. Or the desperate need to impress. "I expect I'll be in Slytherin," Draco said. "Everyone in my family has been." "What's good about Slytherin?" Draco blinked, as though no one had ever asked him that instead of simply assuming. "Ambition," he said after a moment. "Cunning. Slytherins get things done. We don't just wave our wands and hope for the best." "Sounds practical." "It is." Draco studied him. "You're not what I expected. Father always said the Potter boy would come to Hogwarts stuffed with Gryffindor nonsense and Dumbledore worship." "Your father doesn't know me," Harry said simply. "Nobody does. Yet." He left Madame Malkin's with his robes boxed and wrapped and Draco Malfoy staring after him with an expression of genuine confusion, which was, Harry decided, probably the most useful state to leave a Malfoy in. His last stop was Ollivander's. The wand shop was narrow and dusty and crammed floor to ceiling with narrow boxes stacked in towering, precarious columns. It smelled of old wood and something else, something electric, and Harry felt the covenant stir in his chest the moment he crossed the threshold. Magic recognized magic. "Ah," said a soft voice from somewhere in the gloom. "I wondered when I'd be seeing you, Mr. Potter." Ollivander emerged from between the shelves like a ghost materializing from fog, silver-eyed, wispy-haired, with the quiet intensity of someone who'd spent a lifetime listening to things other people couldn't hear. His gaze went straight to Harry's forehead, to the scar, and then moved past it with something like disinterest. His attention was elsewhere. Lower. Deeper. "You carry something old," Ollivander murmured. "Very old. Older than my family's craft." His silver eyes sharpened. "Older than Hogwarts." Harry said nothing. He held Ollivander's gaze and waited. The wand-maker studied him for a long moment, then smiled, a distant, dreamy sort of smile. "Well. Let us find your wand, Mr. Potter. I suspect it will be a memorable match." It was. Ollivander worked through a dozen wands, holly, ash, yew, maple, each one producing a reaction that ranged from nothing to a small explosion that knocked a stack of boxes off a shelf, before his expression went strange. He disappeared into the back of the shop and returned with a single box, older and dustier than the rest, which he set on the counter with the care of someone handling live explosives. "Holly," Ollivander said. 11 inches. Phoenix feather core. A curious wand, Mr. Potter. I remember every wand I've ever sold, and the phoenix that gave the feather for this wand gave only one other. Just one. Harry picked up the wand. The world sang. There was no other word for it. The Covenant's warmth in his chest surged to meet the wand's magic like two rivers joining, and the air around Harry erupted in golden light, not sparks but actual light, warm and steady, that filled the dusty shop and made the thousands of wand boxes hum in their shelves. Ollivander's hair blew back from his face. The windows rattled. And Harry stood at the center of it, 11 years old, holding his wand for the first time, and feeling for the first time in his life that he was complete. The light faded. Ollivander was gripping the edge of the counter with both hands, and his silver eyes were very wide. The brother wand, he whispered. The other feather, it lives in the wand of he who must not be named. Voldemort, Harry said, because he was not going to be afraid of a name. Ollivander flinched. Then he laughed, a single, startled bark of laughter. You are going to be extraordinary trouble, Mr. Potter. That's the plan. Harry paid for his wand and walked out of Ollivander's into the golden afternoon light of Diagon Alley. He had his supplies, his wand, his knowledge, and his contract. In 3 weeks, he would board a train to Hogwarts. In 4, he would begin the process of dismantling and rebuilding the most powerful institution in magical Britain. He was 11 years old, and he was ready. The evening before September 1st, Harry sat in the small room he'd rented above the leaky cauldron. Tom the barkeeper hadn't asked many questions when a boy with famous scar and a pouch full of gold requested lodging, and reviewed his plan one final time. The scroll lay unrolled on the desk before him, its text glowing faintly in the candlelight. Beside it were Ragnarok's authentication documents, Griphook's summary of the Potter estate and its political leverage, and Harry's own notes, 3 years' worth of research distilled into a single sheet of parchment covered in his small, precise handwriting. Step 1, Hogwarts. Get sorted, establish relationships, identify potential allies. He needed people, not followers, not sycophants, but genuine allies who understood what he was trying to do and believed in it. Step 2, file the claim. Walk into the ministry with the covenant and the goblin authentication and invoke the clause of reclamation. Make it public, make it undeniable, and do it with enough political backing that Fudge couldn't bury it. Step 3, survive the fallout. Because there would be fallout. Fudge would fight. The old families would panic. Dumbledore would try to intervene in whatever wise, grandfatherly, ultimately controlling way was his habit. And somewhere out there, if Dobby's rumors and the Daily Prophets between the lines reporting were right, the remnants of Voldemort's influence still lingered, waiting for an opportunity. Harry rolled the scroll up and tied it with the golden cord. He tucked it inside his shirt, felt the familiar warmth settle against his skin, and blew out the candle. Tomorrow, everything began. Platform 9 3/4 was chaos. Harry had expected crowds, Dobby had warned him, but the reality was something else entirely. Hundreds of witches and wizards crammed onto a platform that shouldn't exist, wrestling trunks and owl cages and the occasional loose toad, while a scarlet steam engine billowed smoke overhead and a clock ticked down toward 11. The noise was tremendous. The colors were absurd. A woman with a shopping trolley full of children was shouting about a missing year trumpet. 2 teenagers were having a duel with what appeared to be licorice wands. A small girl was crying because her cat had escaped. Harry moved through it all like a stone in a river, letting the current flow around him. He dressed carefully, new robes, neat hair, or as neat as Potter hair could get, which wasn't very, the quiet confidence of someone who knew exactly where he was going. He caught a few stares, a few whispered recognitions as people spotted the scar, but he didn't stop to engage. He needed a compartment and he needed it before the train got too full. He found one near the back. Empty, quiet, with a window that looked out over the platform. He stowed his trunk, set Hedwig's cage, a snowy owl, purchased on Diagon Alley on a whim that had turned into genuine affection within about 4 hours, on the seat beside him, and settled in to watch the platform through the glass. He saw the Malfoys arrive. Lucius was unmistakable even at a distance, tall, pale, moving through the crowd as though he owned it, one hand on Draco's shoulder in a grip that could have been paternal or possessive. Their eyes met briefly through the window. Lucius's gaze lingered on Harry's scar, then swept dismissively onward. Harry memorized the man's face. Know your opponents. He saw a large family of redheads, 7 or 8 of them, all with the same vivid hair, bustling and laughing and arguing in the comfortable chaos of people who genuinely liked each other. Something tightened in Harry's chest watching them. Not envy, exactly. More like recognition of a thing he'd never had. The train whistle blew. Harry watched the last of the students scramble aboard, the parents wave and dab their eyes, and then the platform was sliding backward and London was unfolding beyond the windows, grey and vast and ordinary. His compartment door slid open. A round-faced boy stood in the gap, looking nervous. "Sorry, everywhere else is full. Do you mind?" "Go ahead," Harry said. The boy wrestled his trunk inside and collapsed onto the opposite seat, red-faced and panting. A toad sat on his shoulder with the resigned expression of an animal that had given up trying to escape. "I'm Neville," the boy said. "Neville Longbottom." Harry knew that name. The Longbottoms were an old pure-blood family, Sacred 28, part of the traditional power structure. But Dobby had mentioned them specifically as one of the few families that had fought against Voldemort. Neville's parents had been Aurors, magical law enforcement, and they'd been tortured into madness after the war by a group of Death Eaters. Neville had been raised by his grandmother. "Harry Potter," Harry said, and watched Neville go through the same sequence as Draco, eyes wide, jaw drop, recovery, but with none of Draco's practiced composure. Neville's shock was completely genuine, and so was the awe that followed it. "Blimey," Neville breathed. "I mean, sorry, that's probably rude, everyone must, sorry, it's fine," Harry said, and meant it. There was something about Neville's open, honest face that defied annoyance. "Nice toad. That's Trevor. He keeps trying to escape. Gran says I'm too soft with him." Neville's voice had the cadence of someone used to being told they weren't enough. Too soft, too slow, too clumsy, too timid. Harry recognized it because he'd heard it in his own voice once, before the Covenant had woken him up. "What house do you want?" Harry asked. Neville's face fell. "Gran wants Gryffindor. Everyone in my family's been Gryffindor. But I'm I'm not exactly brave, am I?" "You got on the train," Harry said. "You're going to a school full of strangers to learn magic you've never done before. That sounds brave to me." Neville stared at him. Then a small, cautious smile appeared, like a flower opening in a place that didn't get much sun. Yeah. I suppose. Thanks." They talked. Harry steered the conversation gently, drawing Neville out, learning about him. The boy was shy but not stupid, he knew an enormous amount about magical plants, could talk about herbology with a fluency and passion that transformed him from awkward to articulate. His problem wasn't a lack of ability but a lack of confidence, ground down by a grandmother who meant well but measured him constantly against parents he could never live up to. Harry liked him. It was that simple. In a world of strategy and politics and ancient contracts, Neville Longbottom was refreshingly, completely real. The compartment door opened again. A girl with bushy brown hair and an expression of determined purpose stuck her head in. "Has anyone seen a toad? A boy named Neville's lost one, oh." She spotted Neville and Trevor. "Never mind. You've got him." "Found his way back on his own," Neville said, patting Trevor's head. The girl didn't leave. She stepped fully into the compartment, eyeing the two boys with the intensity of someone cataloging everything she saw. "I'm Hermione Granger. I'm Muggle-born. I've read all the set texts already, and several supplementary ones. Are either of you?" She stopped. Her eyes had found Harry's scar. "You're Harry Potter. Guilty. You're in modern magical history and the rise and fall of the dark arts and great wizarding events of the 20th century. So I'm told. I haven't read my own press." Hermione's mouth opened, closed, opened again. She looked like someone who had prepared extensively for a test and then been handed the wrong exam. "You haven't. But they're about you. They're about a thing that happened to me when I was a baby. Not really the same as being about me." Harry nodded at the empty seat beside Neville. "Sit down if you want. We were talking about herbology." Hermione sat, though she looked like she wasn't sure she'd been given permission. "Herbology? That's Professor Sprout's class. I've read the textbook twice. Did you know that mandrakes can actually cure petrification? Harry and Neville said simultaneously, and then looked at each other and laughed. Hermione blinked, thrown off again by the discovery that other people also read books. Hermione, Harry said. You said you're Muggle-born. How are you finding the transition? The magical world can be a lot. It was the right question. Hermione's rigid posture softened, and something vulnerable flickered behind her overachieving exterior. There's a lot to learn. And nobody tells you the important things, do they? The textbooks explain magic, but not culture. Nobody explained to me how wizard money works until I was standing in Gringotts looking like an idiot. Nobody told me that saying certain names is considered rude. It's like there's a whole set of rules that everyone else already knows and you're just expected to figure them out. That's not an accident, Harry said. The system is designed to make Muggle-borns feel like outsiders. Keeps the power with the families who've always had it. Hermione stared at him. Neville stared at him. The compartment was very quiet except for the rhythmic clatter of the train. That's a very strong statement, Hermione said carefully. It's an accurate one. Read the Wisengamot's voting records for the last century. Look at who holds seats, who gets appointed to positions of power, who gets their proposals heard. Then look at the demographics. It's not subtle. Hermione's eyes had gone very bright. Not with tears, with the fierce, burning light of someone who'd been handed the framework for an injustice they'd already felt but couldn't articulate. You've researched this. I have. Why? Harry considered his answer. He wasn't ready to reveal the covenant, not yet, not on a train, not before he'd set foot in Hogwarts. But he wanted these two with him. Not as pawns or tools but as allies who chose to stand with him because they believed in the same things. Because someone needs to do something about it, he said. And I'm in a position to. I'll tell you more when we get to school. For now, just know that things are about to change. Neville and Hermione exchanged a look. Then Neville straightened in his seat, and some of the habitual nervousness dropped from his shoulders, and he said, "Count me in." Hermione bit her lip. "I'll need more information before I commit to anything." Harry grinned. "I'd be disappointed if you didn't." The train rolled north, and the countryside outside the windows shifted from suburban sprawl to rolling hills to wild, empty moorland. Harry watched it pass and felt the covenant humming in his chest, steady as a heartbeat, patient as stone. When the train pulled into Hogsmeade Station, Harry stepped onto the platform into cool Scottish evening air and the booming voice of the largest man he had ever seen. "Fur's years. Fur's years over here." Rubeus Hagrid was half-giant and entirely enormous, a mountain of a man with a beard like a black hedge and hands the size of dustbin lids. Harry knew about him from his research, keeper of keys and grounds at Hogwarts, expelled in his third year on charges that Harry's reading of the historical record suggested were almost certainly false, denied the right to use magic, relegated to a servant's role at a school he should have graduated from. Another broken promise. Another injustice. "All right there, Harry." Hagrid beamed down at him with a warmth that was almost physically tangible. "I'd have come to get ye from your relatives, but Professor Dumbledore said ye made your own arrangements." "I did." "Nice to meet you, Hagrid." "Blimey, ye've got your mum's eyes. And, your dad's, well, everything else." "Come on then, boats are this way." The boats carried them across a black lake that reflected the stars, and when Hogwarts appeared around the final bend, the collective gasp of 41st years was audible. Harry didn't gasp, but only because his breath had simply stopped. The castle rose from the cliff face like something grown rather than built, towers and turrets and windows blazing with light, ancient and vast and impossible. Magic saturated the air so thickly he could taste it, could feel it resonating with the Covenant's power in his chest like two instruments finding the same key. This was where his parents had fallen in love. Where they'd learned magic, made friends, become the people who would die to save him. Harry let himself feel that, let the grief and gratitude wash through him, and then he set it carefully aside and walked through the enormous front doors into the entrance hall. Professor McGonagall was waiting for them, a tall, severe-looking woman with spectacles and a no-nonsense demeanor that Harry liked immediately. She explained the sorting in brisk, efficient terms and left them in an antechamber to wait. Around Harry, students fidgeted and whispered and speculated about the test. Neville had gone pale, Hermione was muttering spells under her breath, and Draco Malfoy was holding court with two large boys who appeared to function primarily as an audience. Potter. Draco detached from his entourage and approached. Made any friends yet, or are you still being mysterious? Malfoy. Those your bodyguards? Crabbe and Goyle. Old family associates. Listen, Potter, I've been thinking about what you said at Madame Malkin's. About nobody knowing you. Draco's voice dropped, and the performative drawl softened into something almost genuine. My father says you're either the key to the future or a threat to it. He hasn't decided which yet. Tell your father I said he'd better decide quickly, Harry replied. Before Draco could respond, McGonagall returned and led them into the Great Hall. It was magnificent. For long tables stretched the length of the room, candles floating overhead in constellations that shifted and drifted like slow fireworks, and above it all, a ceiling enchanted to show the night sky, clear and dark and pricked with more stars than Harry had ever seen. At the far end, on a raised platform, sat the staff. Harry's eyes found Dumbledore immediately, tall, silver-bearded, wearing robes of deep purple, watching the incoming students with blue eyes that twinkled behind half-moon spectacles. Those eyes found Harry. Held him. And Harry felt something press against his mind, gentle, subtle, barely there. A touch. A probe. Someone testing the waters. Harry pushed back. Not hard, not aggressively, but with the firm, unmistakable authority of the Covenant, and Dumbledore's twinkling eyes went sharp with surprise. The old man recovered instantly, his expression settling back into benign welcome, but Harry had felt it. Dumbledore had just tried to read his mind, casually, at a distance, as though he had every right. Filed away. Added to the list. The Sorting Hat sat on a stool at the front of the hall. It sang a song, something about the four houses and their qualities, and then McGonagall began calling names. Harry watched each sorting with interest, cataloguing faces and houses, building his mental map of the social landscape. Granger, Hermione, went to Gryffindor, after a deliberation long enough that Harry saw her hands shaking on the stool's edges before the hat made its call. Longbottom, Neville, also went to Gryffindor, though the hat seemed to take even longer with him, and Neville looked stunned, genuinely, wonderfully stunned, when it made its decision. He stumbled toward the Gryffindor table with the hat still on his head and had to run back to hand it to McGonagall, which got a laugh from the hall but also a grin from Harry that was pure, uncomplicated warmth. Malfoy, Draco. Was Slytherin before the hat even fully touched his head. Then, Potter, Harry. The whispers erupted like water from a broken dam. Harry walked to the stool through a wall of sound. Potter. The Harry Potter. The boy who lived. And sat down. McGonagall lowered the hat onto his head, and everything went quiet. Well, 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 said a small voice in his ear. This is remarkable. Harry said nothing. He waited. I've sorted thousands of students, Mr. Potter. Thousands upon thousands. I've never encountered a mind quite like yours. You have courage, enormous courage, the kind that's born from suffering rather than ignorance. You have intelligence, rigorously self-cultivated. You have loyalty to those who earn it. And you have ambition, oh, you have ambition. Not the petty kind. The kind that reshapes worlds. Then you know where I belong, Harry said silently. I know where you could belong. Any house would be fortunate to have you. But the question is which house serves your purpose, isn't it? You're not here just to learn magic. You're here to change everything. That's right. Slytherin would give you the political ground. Gryffindor would give you the moral authority. Ravenclaw would give you credibility. Hufflepuff would give you the loyalty of the overlooked. The hat paused. You've already thought all of this through, haven't you? Months ago. And you've decided. Gryffindor. My parents' house. The house of people who fight for what's right. I don't need Slytherin's political game, I'm already playing it better than any of them. I need a home. Silence from the hat. Then, very softly, you are going to be magnificent trouble, Harry Potter. So I keep hearing. Gryffindor. The Gryffindor table exploded. The red-headed twins from the platform were chanting, "We got Potter. We got Potter," and Neville was beaming and Hermione was clapping with both hands and the rest of the table was on their feet. Harry walked to the table and sat down between Neville and Hermione, and for a moment, just a moment, he let himself be an 11-year-old boy who'd been welcomed somewhere for the first time in his life. Then he looked up at the staff table. Dumbledore was watching him with those sharp blue eyes, the twinkle restored but underlaid with something more cautious. Beside the headmaster, a man in a purple turban met Harry's gaze and looked away quickly, too quickly, and the Covenant pulsed a sudden warning in Harry's chest, sharp and cold, different from its usual warmth. Harry filed that away too. The feast was extraordinary, food appearing on golden plates, more food than Harry had seen in his life, and he ate with the focused determination of someone who'd spent too many years being underfed. Around him, Gryffindor table hummed with conversation. He met Percy Weasley, a prefect with an inflated sense of his own importance. He met Fred and George, the twins, who radiated chaos like a force of nature. He met Ron Weasley, their younger brother, who'd been sorted just after Harry and seemed simultaneously starstruck and trying very hard not to be. My brothers told me the sorting involved wrestling a troll, Ron said glumly, attacking a chicken leg. I'd prepared a strategy and everything. What was the strategy? Harry asked. Run. Harry laughed, a real laugh, unguarded, and Ron grinned, and something clicked between them. Not the deep, strategic connection Harry was building with Neville and Hermione, but something simpler and maybe just as important. Friendship. Normal, uncomplicated, 11-year-old friendship. After the feast, Dumbledore stood to give his start-of-term speech, and Harry listened carefully. Most of it was standard, rules, announcements, the usual. But two things stood out. First, the forbidden corridor on the third floor, mentioned with a casualness that practically begged curious students to investigate. Second, Dumbledore's eyes, which kept drifting to Harry throughout the speech with an expression Harry couldn't quite decode. Curiosity. Concern. Calculation. All three, probably. The Gryffindor common room was warm and round and cluttered in the comfortable way of a space that had been lived in for centuries. Harry stood by the fire while the other first-years explored, feeling the Covenant hum in resonance with the castle's deep magic, and made a decision. Tomorrow he'd start classes. He'd learn magic properly, with a wand, from real teachers. He'd build his friendships, establish his presence, become part of this world. And in 2 weeks, he'd file the claim. 2 weeks. That was all the time he was giving himself. 2 weeks to find his footing, identify his key allies, and prepare for the storm. He went up to the dormitory, drew the curtains of his 4-poster bed, and pulled the Covenant scroll from inside his shirt. In the darkness, the seal glowed faintly gold, a warm point of light against the old parchment. 2 weeks, Harry whispered to it. And then we shake the world. The scroll pulsed once, warm against his fingers, and Harry Potter, the boy who lived, the heir of Peveril, the sovereign owner of the Ministry of Magic, closed his eyes and slept. The first week at Hogwarts passed in a whirlwind. Classes were simultaneously easier and harder than Harry expected, easier because the Covenant had sharpened his mind to a razor's edge and 3 years of theoretical study meant he already understood most of the first-year material, harder because doing magic with a wand was a physical skill that no amount of reading could substitute for. Like knowing the theory of swimming versus actually being in the water. But he learned fast. In charms, he was the second student to successfully levitate a feather. Hermione beat him by about 3 seconds, and the look of triumphant delight on her face was worth the loss. In Transfiguration, McGonagall's eyebrows climbed steadily higher as Harry turned his match into a needle on the first try, then turned it back, then turned it into a slightly different needle just to see if he could. In Herbology, Neville came into his own so completely that Professor Sprout looked like she'd found a long-lost relative, and Harry made a point of publicly deferring to Neville's expertise, building the other boys' confidence one interaction at a time. Potions was different. Professor Snape, greasy-haired, sharp-tongued, billowing through the dungeons like a particularly hostile storm cloud, took one look at Harry and decided to hate him. The man peppered Harry with questions clearly designed to humiliate. What would I get if I added powdered root of asphodel to an infusion of wormwood? Where would you look if I told you to find me a bezoar? Harry answered every single one. Correctly. In detail. Without hesitation. The silence that followed was the loudest thing Harry had ever heard. Snape's face went through several expressions: surprise, fury, suspicion, something darker and more complicated that looked almost like grief, before settling into a mask of cold dislike. It seems fame can buy knowledge, Snape said. Not fame, Professor. Preparation. Though I appreciate the assumption. 20 points from Gryffindor for cheek. Harry accepted them without protest. The points didn't matter. What mattered was that every student in that dungeon had just watched him meet Snape's hostility with calm competence, and the story would spread. By dinner, the whole school would know that Harry Potter wasn't the wide-eyed celebrity they'd expected. The second week was when Harry began to move. Small moves, carefully placed, like the opening gambits of a chess game. He spoke with Daphne Greengrass in the library on Monday. She was a Slytherin first year, quiet and watchful, from a family that Dobby's intelligence reports classified as neutral, not aligned with the old Death Eater families, not aligned with Dumbledore, playing both sides with the careful pragmatism of people who intended to survive no matter who won. Harry found her reading a book on wizarding estate law and sat down across from her without preamble. "That's a dry read for a first year," he said. Daphne looked up. Cool blue eyes assessed him with a maturity that belied her age. Says the Gryffindor in the legal section. Fair point. I'm Harry. I know who you are, Potter. Everyone knows who you are. She closed her book but kept a finger in her page, not committing to the conversation but not ending it either. Smart. What do you want? A conversation. Your family's neutral, right? In the political landscape? Daphne's eyes narrowed. That's a remarkably direct question to ask someone you've just met. I'm a remarkably direct person. And I don't have a lot of time for dancing around things. The Greengrass family has survived every major political shift in the last century by staying flexible. I respect that. I also think flexibility without purpose is just cowardice with better PR. Something flickered in Daphne's eyes. Not offense, interest. And you think you're someone worth committing to? I think the current system is broken, and the people who stay neutral while it collapses don't get to complain about the rubble. But I'm not asking for commitment. I'm asking for a conversation. They talked for an hour. Daphne was sharp, well-informed, and ruthlessly practical. She understood the political landscape of Wizarding Britain with the clarity of someone who'd been raised to navigate it. She didn't trust Harry, not yet, but she was intrigued. More importantly, she confirmed several things Harry had suspected about the current state of the Wizengamot, including the fact that Fudge's coalition was weaker than it appeared, held together by favors and fear rather than genuine support. If someone shook the table hard enough, Daphne said, half of Fudge's allies would switch sides in a heartbeat. They're loyal to power, not to him. Good to know, Harry said. Daphne studied him. You're planning something. I'm always planning something. That's not an answer. No. It isn't. Harry stood. Thanks for the conversation, Greengrass. I'll be in touch. He left her sitting in the library with a thoughtful expression on her face, which was exactly where he wanted her. On Wednesday, Harry wrote a letter. He sat in the common room after everyone had gone to bed, the fire burned down to embers, and composed the most important piece of writing of his life. It was addressed to Amelia Bones, head of the Department of Magical Law Enforcement, a woman Dobby described as the only honest person in the ministry, and Ragnarok described as the only human worth dealing with. The letter was brief and precise. Madam Bones, I am Harry James Potter, heir of the House of Potter and, through the Peveril bloodline, the sovereign named in the founding covenant of the Ministry of Magic. I possess the original covenant, authenticated by the Goblin Nation under Director Ragnarok's personal seal. I intend to invoke the clause of reclamation and formally assume sovereign authority over the ministry. I request a private meeting at your earliest convenience to present the covenant and discuss the legal process. I trust your office to handle this with the discretion and integrity the matter deserves. I am currently a first-year student at Hogwarts, but I can make myself available at any time. Respectfully, Harry James Potter, heir of Peveril, sovereign of the covenant. He read it 3 times, changed 2 words, and sealed it with a drop of wax from the common room candle. Then he pressed his thumb to the wax, and the covenant's magic flared, the seal transformed, becoming the triangular Peveril mark, gold against red, unmistakable to anyone who knew what it meant. Hedwig, Harry murmured, and his owl descended from her perch near the window, landing on his shoulder with a soft hoot. This goes to Amelia Bones, head of Magical Law Enforcement. No one else touches it. Hedwig nipped his ear, affectionate, understanding, and took the letter in her beak. Harry opened the window, and she vanished into the night sky, a white shape against the stars, carrying the letter that would change everything. Harry closed the window, turned back to the dying fire, and felt the covenant burning steady and sure in his chest. The match was struck. The fuse was lit. Now he just had to wait for the explosion. Chapter 2, The Boy Who Owned the Reply came faster than Harry expected. He was sitting at breakfast on Friday morning, 2 days after sending the letter, when Hedwig swooped into the great hall with the rest of the Morning Post and dropped an envelope directly into his porridge. The envelope was heavy, cream-colored, sealed with the official stamp of the Department of Magical Law Enforcement, a wand crossed with a set of scales, and addressed in a hand so precise it could have been typeset. Harry fished it out of the porridge, wiped it clean with a napkin, and opened it under the table. Mr. Potter, your letter has been received and its contents noted. I will not insult either of us by pretending I was not shocked. I have, however, taken the liberty of consulting the Goblin Liaison Office, which confirms that Director Ragnarok has authenticated a document matching your description. I will meet with you this Saturday at 10 a.m. Given the sensitivity of this matter, I suggest a neutral location. The Hog's Head Inn in Hogsmeade has private rooms available. Come alone or with one advisor of your choosing. I will extend the same courtesy. Amelia Bones Head, Department of Magical Law Enforcement. Harry read it twice, folded it, and slipped it into his pocket. His pulse was steady, his hands weren't shaking, and a part of him, the part that had been crawling toward this moment for 3 years, felt something like relief. The ball was in play. What was that? Hermione asked from his left, because Hermione noticed everything. An invitation, Harry said. I need to talk to you and Neville after classes today. Somewhere private. Hermione's eyes went sharp. Neville, across the table, looked up from his toast with a mouthful of marmalade and nodded. The room of requirement, Neville said, surprising both of them. My Gran mentioned it once. 7th floor, across from the tapestry of Barnabas the Barmy. You walk past it 3 times thinking about what you need and it gives you a room. Harry stared at him. Neville, that's brilliant. Neville turned pink. Gran says a lot of things. Most of it's complaints. Occasionally something useful slips through. That evening, the 3 of them stood on the 7th floor, watching a door materialize in the blank stone wall. Harry went first. The room that appeared was small and comfortable, armchairs by a fire, a table with tea things, warm light, no windows. Private. Perfect. Harry sat down, pulled the covenant scroll from inside his shirt, and set it on the table between them. "All right," he said. "It's time I told you what's actually going on." He told them everything. The cupboard under the stairs, the loose stone, the scroll, the golden light. 3 years of study and preparation. The goblins. The clause of reclamation. The letter to Amelia Bones and the meeting tomorrow. He told it plainly, without drama or embellishment, letting the facts speak for themselves. When he finished, the fire crackled in the silence and Hermione was gripping the arms of her chair so hard her knuckles had gone white. "You're telling me," she said, her voice very controlled, "that you legally own the Ministry of Magic. That's what the Covenant says. That's what the goblins confirmed. May I see it?" Harry unrolled the scroll and pushed it across the table. Hermione leaned forward, and Harry watched her expression transform as she read, moving through disbelief, fascination, meticulous analysis, and finally landing on something that looked like wonder. "This is genuine," she breathed. "The spell work in the parchment alone, I can feel it, Harry. It's like standing next to Hogwarts. This magic is alive." "It is. It's been alive since before the Ministry existed." Neville hadn't said anything. He was staring at the scroll with an expression Harry couldn't quite read. Then he looked up, and his eyes were bright. "My parents fought to fix the system," Neville said quietly. "They believed the Ministry could be better. That's why they became Aurors. That's why they fought in the war. And afterward, nobody did anything. They caught the people who hurt Mum and Dad, and then everything just went back to the way it was. The same families in charge. The same corruption. The same rot." His voice cracked, steadied. "If this is real, if you can actually do something, I can," Harry said. "I will. But I need people I trust. Not followers. Partners." Neville held out his hand. Harry took it, and the handshake was firm, firmer than Harry expected. There was steel under Neville's softness. He'd suspected it, now he knew. Hermione was still reading the Covenant, her finger tracing the lines of text, her lips moving silently. Finally she sat back. "The legal framework is extraordinary," she said. "Whoever wrote this understood magical contract law at a level that's, well, it's beyond anything in the current textbooks. The clause of reclamation is essentially self-executing. Once you invoke it with the authenticated covenant and prove your bloodline, the transfer of authority is automatic. The Ministry can't reject it. The Wisengamot can't overrule it. It's baked into the foundational magic of the institution itself. That's what Ragnarok said." But, Hermione held up a finger, and this was why Harry needed her, because Hermione always found the but. "Enforcement is another matter. The Covenant can give you legal authority, but if people don't recognize it, if the minister refuses to step aside, if the Wisengamot votes to ignore it, you'd have the law on your side but no practical power. You'd need allies. Political support. Public legitimacy. Which is why I'm meeting with Amelia Bones tomorrow. She's the most respected law enforcement official in Britain. If she validates the claim publicly, it becomes very difficult for Fudge to bury it. And if she doesn't? Then I go to the Wisengamot directly. The old families, the ones who signed the original covenant, have a vested interest in its enforcement. Their power predates the Ministry. A founding document that validates ancient magical authority. Half the Sacred 28 would back it just to reclaim influence they've lost." Hermione frowned. "That's a dangerous alliance. Those families are flawed, political, and self-interested. I know. But I don't need them to be saints. I need them to be useful. The alliances are temporary. The reforms are permanent." Harry leaned forward. "Hermione, I'm not going to pretend the road ahead is clean. Politics never is. But the goal is real. Equal rights for Muggleborns. Fair treatment for magical creatures. An end to corruption in the Auror office, the courts, the whole rotting structure. I can't do it by being pure. I have to do it by being smart. Hermione chewed her lip. She looked at the Covenant, then at Harry, then at Neville. What do you need from me? Everything you're already good at. Research, analysis, finding the flaws in my plans before my enemies do. Be my critic. Be the person who tells me when I'm wrong. A small smile. I've been told I'm good at telling people they're wrong. Then this should come naturally. She laughed, and the tension in the room broke like a wave against rocks. All right. I'm in. But I reserve the right to argue with every decision you make. I wouldn't have it any other way. They talked for another hour, refining the plan for tomorrow's meeting, anticipating Bones's likely questions, rehearsing Harry's responses. By the time they left the room of requirement, it was nearly curfew and the corridors were empty. Nearly empty. Mr. Potter. The voice came from behind them, and all three students turned. Albus Dumbledore stood at the end of the corridor, materializing from the shadows with the unsettling silence of a man who'd been there longer than any of them had noticed. His blue eyes moved from Harry to Hermione to Neville and back, and the twinkle was dialed down to something more focused. A late evening for first years, Dumbledore said mildly. We were studying, Professor, Harry said. Lost track of time. On the 7th floor. Quite a distance from the library. We liked the exercise. Dumbledore's lips twitched. Not quite a smile. I see. Miss Granger, Mr. Longbottom, I believe your common room is waiting. Mr. Potter, might I have a word? Hermione shot Harry a look. He gave her the smallest nod, it's fine, go, and she and Neville headed down the corridor. Neville glanced back once, his face set with concern, before they rounded the corner. Harry and Dumbledore stood alone in the corridor. The torchlight threw long shadows across the stone floor, and somewhere in the castle, a clock chimed 9. Walk with me. Dumbledore offered. They walked. Through corridors and down staircases that shifted beneath their feet, past portraits that murmured and windows that showed a sky full of stars. Dumbledore moved slowly, his hands clasped behind his back, and Harry matched his pace and waited. The headmaster wanted something. Harry would let him come to it. I knew your parents very well, Harry, Dumbledore said finally. Your father was one of the most talented students I ever taught. Reckless, certainly. Arrogant, at times. But when it mattered, when the darkness came, James Potter stood up and fought with everything he had. He paused at a window, looking out at the moonlit grounds. Your mother was extraordinary. Not just brilliant, good. Genuinely, deeply good. The kind of person who makes you believe the world can be better simply by existing in it. Harry said nothing. He let Dumbledore talk, and he catalogued every word, every micro-expression, every shift in tone. I tell you this because I want you to understand something, Dumbledore continued. I cared about your parents. I care about you. And I am concerned. About what? Dumbledore turned those blue eyes on him, and there was no twinkle at all now. About the fact that you are not the boy I expected. I have watched you for a week, Harry. You are confident, capable, and possessed of a knowledge base that far exceeds what any 11-year-old should have. Your mind is shielded, in a way that I have only encountered in trained adult wizards. And you carry something with you. Something old and powerful that I can sense but not identify. Harry met his gaze and held it. Is there a question in there, Professor? Several. But I'll start with the most important one. Dumbledore's voice was soft, gentle, carrying the weight of someone who believed he was speaking from a place of wisdom and care. What has happened to you, Harry? What has changed you? Life happened to me, Harry said. My parents were murdered. I was placed with people who despised me. I spent 7 years sleeping in a cupboard under the stairs, being told I was worthless, being punished for existing. He kept his voice even, factual, though the old anger stirred in his chest. And then I found something that showed me I wasn't worthless. That showed me the world I'd been hidden from, and what was wrong with it, and that I had the power to fix it. So I started preparing. What did you find? Something I'll share when I'm ready. Not before. Dumbledore studied him for a long moment. Then he sighed, a deep, old sigh that seemed to carry decades of weight. I had hoped, I had believed, that your years with your relatives, however difficult, would keep you safe. There are protections tied to your mother's blood, ancient magic. I know about the blood wards, Harry said, because he did. Lily Potter's sacrifice created a protection anchored to her bloodline. As long as I call the Dursleys' house home, that protection remains active. He paused. It's a clever piece of magic. It's also a cage. You placed me there knowing what they were, didn't you? Dumbledore didn't answer immediately. When he did, his voice was quieter than before. I placed you where you would be safest. You placed me where you could find me. Where I'd be isolated from the magical world, ignorant of my own heritage, dependent on your intervention when the time came. You planned to show up on my 11th birthday and introduce me to a world I should never have been kept from, and I'd be grateful, and overwhelmed, and pliable. Harry's voice was steady as stone. I don't blame you for the logic. Voldemort's followers were hunting for me. Safety had to come first. But you made decisions about my life without my input, and some of those decisions caused me real harm. I'm not going to pretend that's okay just because you meant well. The silence that followed was thick enough to touch. Dumbledore's face had gone very still, and behind his spectacles, his eyes held something Harry hadn't expected: pain. Real, genuine pain. Not the performance of an old man caught in a manipulation, but the private anguish of someone confronting a truth they'd been avoiding. You may be right, Dumbledore said quietly. I have made many decisions in my long life, Harry. Not all of them were wise. And the ones made for the right reasons are not always the ones that cause the least harm. I believe you, Harry said. And I'm not your enemy, Professor. But I'm not your pawn either. I have my own plans, my own path. I'm asking you, respectfully, to let me walk it. And if your path leads somewhere dangerous, then I'll handle it. I'm better prepared than you think. Dumbledore looked at him for a long time. Then a ghost of the twinkle returned, not the performative warmth of a manipulator, but something more genuine. Sadder. You are very much your mother's son. She had the same way of making me feel both proud and deeply inadequate. He placed a hand on Harry's shoulder, briefly, gently. I will not pretend I am comfortable with what I sense in you, Harry. But I will extend you a measure of trust that I do not extend lightly. Prove me right to do so. I intend to. They parted at the fat lady's portrait, and Harry watched Dumbledore walk away down the corridor, his purple robes trailing behind him, his steps slower than before. The old man was rattled. Good. Not because Harry wanted Dumbledore as an enemy, he didn't, genuinely. But because Dumbledore needed to understand, from the very beginning, that this Harry Potter was not someone who could be guided or managed or steered. This Harry Potter was a force of nature with a plan. Saturday morning dawned grey and cold, Scottish autumn settling over Hogsmeade like a damp blanket. Harry left the castle early, before most students were awake, using a passage Dobby had told him about that led from behind a one-eyed witch statue on the 3rd floor directly into the cellar of Honeyduke's sweet shop. From there, it was a short walk through the village to the Hog's Head Inn. The Hog's Head was nothing like the Leaky Cauldron. Where Tom's pub was warm and bustling, this place was dark, quiet, and faintly hostile, a bar for people who didn't want to be seen, with grimy windows and a barkeeper who looked like he'd seen everything and approved of none of it. Harry walked in, ordered a butterbeer with a confidence that made the barkeeper raise an eyebrow but not argue, and was directed to a private room at the top of the stairs. Amelia Bones was already there. She was exactly as Dobby had described her, square-jawed, solid, with close-cropped grey hair and a monocle that gave her the appearance of someone who could see through walls. She sat at a small table with a cup of tea and a stack of files, and when Harry entered, she stood and extended her hand. "Mr. Potter. Madam Bones. Thank you for meeting me." They shook. Her grip was firm, her gaze direct. She gestured him to a chair and sat back down, lifting her monocle to study him with an intensity that would have been intimidating if Harry weren't already past intimidation. "I'll be honest with you," she said. "When I received your letter, my first instinct was to dismiss it as a prank. An 11-year-old claiming sovereign authority over the Ministry of Magic, you can understand my skepticism. Completely. But then I checked with the Goblin Liaison Office, and they confirmed that Director Ragnarok, who, I should note, does not confirm anything for wizards as a general rule, has personally authenticated a document matching your description. Which meant either the goblins have developed a sense of humor, or this is real." She took a sip of tea. "The goblins do not have a sense of humor." Harry placed the Covenant scroll on the table. He untied the golden cord and unrolled the parchment, and the room immediately changed. The ambient temperature shifted, not warmer or colder, but different, charged with the unmistakable pressure of ancient magic. The sigil at the bottom of the scroll glowed, faint gold in the dim room, and the text seemed to shimmer. Amelia Bones set down her teacup very carefully. She leaned forward, and Harry watched her read, slowly, meticulously, line by line. Her expression moved through the same journey Hermione's had, disbelief, analysis, wonder. But where Hermione's wonder was academic, Bones's was political. She understood immediately what this document meant. "Who else knows about this?" she asked when she'd finished. "The goblins. 2 of my friends at Hogwarts. You. Not Dumbledore. He knows I'm carrying something powerful. He doesn't know what." Bones nodded slowly. "And Fudge?" "Not yet." She leaned back in her chair and looked at Harry, really looked, the way someone examines a person when they're deciding whether to trust them with their career and possibly their life. "Tell me what you want, Mr. Potter. Not the legal argument. Not the political strategy. Tell me what you actually want." Harry met her gaze. "I want a ministry that works. Not for the pureblood families, not for the wealthy, not for whoever's buying influence this week. A ministry that serves all magical people equally. That treats Muggleborns as full citizens. That doesn't enslave house elves or persecute werewolves or lock people in Azkaban without trial." Bones didn't flinch, but something shifted in her eyes. She was thinking about something specific, Harry realized, something personal. "My brother Edgar was killed in the First War," she said. "Along with his wife and children. They were murdered by Death Eaters who were never properly tried because certain influential families made generous donations to the minister's reconstruction fund, and suddenly, evidence went missing and witnesses developed amnesia." Her voice was controlled, precise, carrying the kind of anger that had been refined by years into something cold and diamond-hard. "I have spent my entire career trying to fix the system from within. I have been blocked at every turn by the very corruption you're describing. So when I ask what you want, Mr. Potter, I'm not being rhetorical. I'm asking because if this is real, if this document means what I think it means, then you're holding the most powerful weapon against institutional corruption that has ever existed in magical Britain, and I need to know if you're going to use it wisely or waste it." "That's fair," Harry said. "And the answer is that I don't know if I'll always be wise. I'm 11. I'm going to make mistakes. But I'm going to surround myself with people like you, people who know the system, who've been fighting the good fight, who'll tell me when I'm wrong. I'm not looking to be a dictator. I'm looking to be a catalyst." Silence. Bones picked up her teacup, took a slow sip, and set it down. "The clause of reclamation," she said. "You understand how it works. The covenant holder presents the authenticated document to the full Wisengamot. The bloodline is verified through magical means, the covenant itself handles that part. Once the bloodline is confirmed and the clause is invoked, the transfer of sovereign authority is automatic. The current minister retains operational control but reports to the sovereign. Major policy decisions require sovereign approval. Appointments to key positions, head of the DMLE, chief warlock, department heads, become sovereign prerogatives. Bones raised an eyebrow. You've done your research. 3 years of it. Then you also know that invoking the clause requires a formal session of the full Wisengamot, which can only be called by the chief warlock, the minister, or, and this is the part most people don't know, a sitting member of the Wisengamot with the support of at least 5 other members. The Potter's seat, Harry said. Exactly. The Potters have held a hereditary seat on the Wisengamot since its founding. When your parents died, the seat went dormant, there was no one to claim it. But you're of age to inherit, and the goblins can process the paperwork. Bones paused. I should tell you that of age to inherit doesn't mean what Fudge will claim it means. The law says the seat can be claimed by any recognized head of house, regardless of age. There's precedent. The Longbottom seat was held in trust by Augusta Longbottom when her grandson was a baby, and the Malfoy seat was claimed by Lucius when he was 16. So I claim the Potter seat, rally 5 supporters, and call a Wisengamot session. That's the process. Bones fixed him with her monocle. The politics will be harder. Fudge has friends on the Wisengamot. He has the Daily Prophet in his pocket. The moment you make this public, he'll do everything in his power to discredit you, delay the session, and bury the covenant. I know. Harry pulled a folded parchment from his pocket, his notes, the careful list of names and allegiances he'd been building for months. Which is why I need to move fast and I need the right allies. I already have preliminary interest from the Greengrass family. The Longbottom seat will support me, Neville's already committed. And I think there are at least a dozen families on the Wisengamot who'd back the covenant just to check Fudge's power. Bones took the parchment and scanned it. Her expression shifted, surprise, then something like respect. You've mapped the entire Wisengamot. At 11. I'm a motivated student. For the first time, Amelia Bones smiled. It was thin, brief, and slightly terrifying, the smile of a warrior who'd just been handed a weapon she'd been waiting for her entire career. All right, Mr. Potter. I'm going to tell you what I'm prepared to do, and what I'm not. She stood and walked to the window, looking out at the grey Hogsmeade Street below. I will validate the covenant's authenticity through my office. I will provide legal counsel on the clause of reclamation. And when the time comes, I will stand in the Wisengamot and testify to its legitimacy. She turned back to face him. What I will not do is act as your political agent. I'm a law enforcement officer, not a lobbyist. If you want allies on the Wisengamot, you'll have to win them yourself. I wouldn't have it any other way. And one more thing. She sat back down and leaned forward, her voice dropping. You need to be prepared for the possibility that Fudge won't play fair. He's not a brave man, but cornered animals are dangerous. He has connections to people who operate outside the law, and he won't hesitate to use them if he feels threatened enough. I know, Harry said. I've been underestimated my whole life, Madam Bones. It's one of my greatest assets. She studied him one final moment. Then she extended her hand across the table. Then let's begin. Harry shook her hand, and the covenant pulsed warm against his chest, and the alliance that would shake magical Britain to its foundations was sealed in a dingy room above a pub by a woman who'd been waiting for justice and a boy who'd come to deliver it. He returned to Hogwarts through the Honeyduke's passage with the sun breaking through the clouds and a timeline crystallizing in his mind. Claim the Potter seat first, Ragnarok could process that within days. Then identify the 5 Wisengamot supporters. Then call the session. 2 weeks, he'd said. Make it 3. Do it right. Harry emerged from behind the one-eyed witch statue and nearly walked straight into Draco Malfoy. Draco was leaning against the opposite wall with his arms crossed and an expression that said he'd been waiting specifically for this. Crabbe and Goyle were nowhere to be seen. This was a private ambush. "Interesting statue," Draco said casually. "I've been watching it for about an hour." "You went in, and you didn't come out from anywhere inside the castle. Which means there's a passage behind it. Which means you just came from outside. Which means," he straightened up. "Where have you been, Potter?" Harry assessed the situation in a heartbeat. Draco was fishing. He might suspect, or he might simply be a curious 11-year-old who'd noticed something odd. Either way, the Malfoy heir knowing Harry had left the castle was a complication. But it could also be an opportunity. "You're observant," Harry said. "That's useful. I'm a Malfoy. Observation is survival." "Is that your father's line or yours?" Draco's jaw tightened. "Does it matter?" "It matters to me. I'm trying to figure out if I'm talking to Draco Malfoy or to Lucius Malfoy's son. They're not the same thing." The corridor was quiet. Somewhere below, the Saturday bustle of the castle carried on, footsteps, laughter, the distant clatter of lunch being prepared. Up here, in this forgotten stretch of the third floor, two 11-year-old boys stood on opposite sides of a divide that was older than either of them. "My father wants me to get close to you," Draco said abruptly. "He wrote to me this week. Said to find out what you're planning, what you know, who your allies are. Said the Malfoy family needs to be positioned for whatever comes next." Harry raised an eyebrow. "And you're telling me this because?" "Because I'm not stupid. If I pretend to be your friend while secretly reporting to my father, you'll figure it out eventually, and then I'll have made an enemy of the most famous wizard in Britain who also happens to be smarter than half the adults I know." Draco's composure cracked slightly, and underneath it was something raw, frustration, maybe, or the specific exhaustion of a child trying to navigate a world built by adults who use their children as chess pieces. "I'd rather be honest. My father has his agenda. I'm 11, and I'd like to figure out my own." It was the most genuine thing Harry had heard Draco say. He could see the cost of it in the boy's face, the way his shoulders were tense, the way his hands were clenched at his sides. This was a risk for Draco. Honesty, in the Malfoy household, was probably not rewarded. "All right," Harry said. "I appreciate the honesty. Here's some in return. I am planning something. Something big. Something that will change the political landscape of magical Britain. Your father is going to have to pick a side. So are you. And if I pick the wrong one, then you'll be on the wrong side of history. But you'll have picked it yourself, and that counts for something." Draco stared at him. Then, slowly, some of the tension drained from his frame. "You're the strangest person I've ever met, Potter. I'll take that as a compliment." It was meant as an observation. But the corner of Draco's mouth twitched, almost, not quite, a smile. "I'll think about what you've said. That's all I'm asking." Draco turned and walked away down the corridor, and Harry watched him go and felt a flicker of something unexpected. Sympathy, maybe. Or recognition. They were both children shaped by forces they hadn't chosen, both trying to find their own path through a world that wanted to use them. The difference was that Harry had a map. And a contract. And absolutely no intention of being used by anyone. The letter to Ragnarok went out that afternoon, requesting formal processing of the Potter seat claim. The goblins, who did not operate on wizard time or wizard bureaucracy, had it done by Tuesday. A goblin-made seal, the Potter family crest, a stag rampant against a field of crimson, arrived by special courier, along with a formal notification to the Wisengamot that seat 47 was no longer dormant. Harry heard about the reaction secondhand, through a letter from Amelia Bones that arrived Wednesday morning, concise and slightly amused. The notification reached the Wisengamot yesterday. Fudge reportedly turned the color of an overripe plum. Dumbledore was seen speaking quietly with several senior members. Lucius Malfoy has requested an emergency meeting with the minister. I thought you'd like to know. Harry did like to know. He read the letter at breakfast, folded it neatly, and turned his attention to the next phase, gathering his 5 supporters. He had Neville, or rather, he would have the Longbottom seat, once he convinced Augusta Longbottom. That conversation happened Thursday evening, via a fluke call from McGonagall's office, which Harry had requested with a politeness that had left the deputy headmistress suspicious but unable to find grounds for refusal. Augusta Longbottom's face materialized in the green flames, iron-haired, sharp-eyed, wearing a hat with a stuffed vulture on it that somehow managed to look intimidating rather than ridiculous. So, she said, staring down at Harry through the fire. You're the Potter boy who's claimed his seat at 11 and sent Fudge into a panic. My grandson seems to think you hung the moon. Your grandson is the bravest person I've met at this school, and I need your help. Augusta blinked. Whatever she'd expected Harry to open with, it wasn't that. Brave? Neville? He showed up to a school full of strangers carrying the weight of parents he can't remember and a grandmother who measures him against legends. And he's still standing. Still trying. Still kind. That's braver than anything I've ever done. The fire crackled. Augusta Longbottom's expression underwent a transformation, the rigid mask of the stern matriarch shifting to reveal something underneath that was fragile and fierce and aching. You remind me of his mother, she said, her voice rough. Alice always could see the best in people and make them see it too. She drew herself up. What do you need? Harry told her about the covenant. He told her about the clause of reclamation. He told her he needed 5 Wisengamot seats to call a session, and the Longbottom seat was the first he was asking for. You're asking me to openly oppose the Minister of Magic on the word of an 11-year-old, Augusta said. I'm asking you to support the legal framework that your family helped create. The Longbottoms were among the original signatories of the covenant. Your ancestors helped build the ministry. I'm asking you to help me fix it. Silence. Then Augusta Longbottom smiled, and it was the kind of smile that made Harry understand exactly where Neville's hidden steel came from. The Longbottom seat stands with the covenant, she said. Tell me when and where. 2 down. 3 to go. The Greengrass seat came next, and it was harder. Harry met with Daphne in the library again. Their conversations had become a regular occurrence, drawing suspicious glances from students in both their houses, and asked her to approach her father. My father doesn't commit to anything he can't profit from, Daphne said flatly. That's not cynicism. It's a fact. Then tell him this, the covenant will succeed. When it does, the families who supported it early will be remembered. The families who opposed it will be remembered too. And the families who sat on the fence will be forgotten entirely. Harry paused. Your father doesn't want to be forgotten. Daphne regarded him for a long moment. You're manipulating him. I'm presenting accurate information and letting him draw his own conclusions. That's not manipulation. That's politics. In my family, those are the same word. But she was already standing, already heading for the Ollery. I'll write to him tonight. Cyrus Greengrass's reply came 2 days later, a cautious yes, hedged with conditions and escape clauses that Daphne translated for Harry in the library. He'll support you publicly as long as it looks like you're winning, she said. The moment it looks like you might lose, he'll distance himself. That's the best you'll get. It's enough. 3 down. The 4th seat came from an unexpected direction. Harry was leaving Charms on Monday of his 4th week when a paper airplane zoomed down the corridor and hit him in the forehead. He unfolded it and read, Mr. Potter. I understand you're collecting supporters for a Wisengamot action. The Abbott seat may be available, contingent on a conversation. Hannah Abbott, Hufflepuff first year, can arrange a meeting with her mother. Regards, a friend. No signature. No identifying marks. Harry pocketed the note, found Hannah Abbott at lunch, a round-faced girl with blonde pigtails who looked startled but not displeased to be approached, and within a week had secured the Abbott seat through Hannah's mother, who turned out to be a quiet, furious woman with a list of grievances against the ministry that ran to 6 pages. The 5th seat was the hardest and the most important, and it came from the last place Harry expected. He was in the Gryffindor common room on a Wednesday evening, working through a transfiguration essay that was 3 times the required length because Hermione had gotten involved, when the fire turned green and a face appeared in the flames that made the entire common room go silent. Lucius Malfoy. "Mr. Potter," said the pale, aristocratic face in the fire. "Might we have a word? Privately?" The common room was frozen. Percy Weasley looked like he was trying to decide whether to report this or pretend it wasn't happening. Fred and George had identical expressions of fascinated horror. Ron had gone the color of old milk. Harry stood, walked to the fire, and cast a privacy ward around the hearth that made the other students' eyes go wide. First years didn't know privacy wards. Harry knew several, taught to him by Dobby from the remnants of old Malfoy family magic, which was a delicious irony he intended to savor. "Mr. Malfoy. This is unexpected." Lucius's face in the flames was controlled, composed, giving away nothing. "I'll be direct, Mr. Potter. I know about the Covenant. I know you've claimed your seat. I know you're gathering supporters to call a Wisengamot session." A pause. "I know because Cornelius Fudge has spent the last week in my drawing room drinking my brandy and begging me to help him stop you. And I've been listening, and thinking, and reviewing certain family records that my ancestors kept rather meticulously. The Malfoy family was not among the original Covenant signatories. We arrived in Britain later, after the Norman conquest. But we have records referencing the Covenant. Descriptions. Context. And those records suggest that the document you possess is not merely a legal instrument but a piece of living magic that cannot be forged, cannot be altered, and cannot be resisted. That's correct. Then Fudge is finished. He simply doesn't know it yet. Lucius's gray eyes, so like Draco's, gleamed in the firelight. "I am a practical man, Mr. Potter. I do not fight battles I cannot win, and I do not oppose forces I cannot overcome. The Covenant is such a force. The question is not whether you will succeed but what the political landscape will look like when you do. And you want to be on the right side of it. I want my family to be positioned appropriately, yes. I can offer you the Malfoy seat on the Wisengamot, which would give you your 5 supporters. In return, I expect, let us say, consideration." Harry was quiet for a moment. He thought about Dobby, chained to the Malfoy household, abused and loyal and desperate for freedom. He thought about Draco, honest in a corridor, trying to be his own person. He thought about the pragmatism of power and the compromises it demanded. "I'll accept the Malfoy seat support," Harry said. "Consideration is something I extend to people who earn it. Your support gets you a seat at the table. What you do at the table determines everything else." Lucius regarded him through the flames. "Then, you have a politician's instincts, Mr. Potter. I look forward to seeing them in action." The fire went green, then orange, and Lucius Malfoy was gone. Harry dropped the privacy ward. The common room was staring at him. He walked back to his seat, picked up his quill, and returned to his transfiguration essay as though nothing unusual had happened. "Was that Lucius Malfoy?" Ron whispered, having crept closer. "Yes. In our common room fire. Technically in his own drawing room. The fire is just a medium." What did he want? Harry looked up from his essay and smiled. He wanted to pick the winning side. The formal request for a Wisengamot session went out the following morning. 5 seats in support: Potter, Longbottom, Greengrass, Abbott, and Malfoy. The request cited the founding covenant and a clause of reclamation and demanded a full session within 30 days, as was the legal right of any 5 members acting in concert. The response from the ministry was immediate and furious. The Daily Prophet ran a front-page story the next day: boy who lived claims to own ministry, delusional or dangerous. The article, written by a reporter named Rita Skeeter, was a masterwork of innuendo and character assassination. Harry was portrayed as a traumatized child, possibly mentally unstable, being manipulated by dark forces for purposes unknown. The covenant was dismissed as a probable forgery. The supporting families were painted as opportunists. Harry read the article at breakfast, folded the paper neatly, and said to Hermione, "How fast can you draft a legal response? How long do you need it to be? Short. Sharp. Undeniable." Hermione's response, co-authored with Harry and reviewed by Amelia Bones, appeared in the Daily Prophet 2 days later, not as an article but as a paid legal notice, funded by the Potter Vault, to the wizarding public. The founding covenant of the Ministry of Magic has been authenticated by the Goblin Nation under Director Ragnarok's personal seal. The authentication has been independently verified by the Department of Magical Law Enforcement. The legal basis of the clause of reclamation has been reviewed and confirmed by 3 independent magical law practitioners. Mr. Harry James Potter, heir of the House of Potter and the House of Peveril, has the legal right to invoke the clause. A full Wisengamot session has been requested, supported by 5 sitting members, in accordance with established law. The Daily Prophet's recent coverage contained 18 factual errors, which are enumerated in the attached addendum. We invite the Prophet to issue corrections at its earliest convenience. The truth does not require defense. It requires a platform. The addendum was 3 pages long. Hermione had enjoyed writing it enormously. The reaction was seismic. Owls flooded Hogwarts, from supporters, from critics, from journalists, from families Harry had never heard of requesting meetings. The Wisengamot was in uproar. Fudge made 3 separate public statements in a single day, each more incoherent than the last, alternately dismissing the covenant as a hoax and threatening legal action against anyone who supported it. And through it all, Harry went to class, did his homework, practiced magic, and built his alliances. He was 11 years old, and he was not afraid. The Wisengamot session was scheduled for November 15th. 4 weeks away. 4 weeks to prepare, to shore up support, to anticipate every possible counterattack. Fudge was not idle during those 4 weeks. He launched a formal investigation into the covenant's authenticity, which backfired when the investigator, a senior unspeakable named Croaker, confirmed it was genuine. He attempted to have the session postponed on procedural grounds, which Amelia Bones blocked with a blistering legal brief. He even tried to have Harry removed from Hogwarts on the grounds that he was a disruptive influence, which Dumbledore, to his credit, shut down immediately. Whatever my concerns about Mr. Potter's activities, Dumbledore told the Board of Governors in a statement that was widely reported, he is a student at this school and is entitled to its protection. He will not be removed. Harry filed that under complicated. Dumbledore was protecting him publicly while almost certainly maneuvering privately. The old man's game was deeper than anyone else's, and Harry hadn't figured out all the angles yet. But November 15th was coming, and when it arrived, angles wouldn't matter. Only the truth of the covenant and the magic that enforced it. Harry stood at his dormitory window the night before the session, looking out at the moonlit grounds of Hogwarts. Behind him, his dress robes hung pressed and ready. On his desk, his notes were organized, his arguments rehearsed, his contingencies planned. The covenant hummed against his chest, warm and steady, patient as the stone it had been hidden behind for centuries. Tomorrow, he would walk into the Wisengamot and claim his birthright. Tomorrow, Cornelius Fudge would learn that the comfortable world he'd built on corruption and compromise was ending. Tomorrow, the magical world would meet the real Harry Potter, not the boy who lived, not the orphan, not the scar, but the boy who'd found a piece of ancient magic in a cupboard under the stairs and decided to use it to change everything. He wasn't nervous. He wasn't afraid. He was ready. Harry pressed his hand against the covenant, felt its warmth pulse in answer, and whispered to the darkness, "Tomorrow." Chapter 3, The Weight of the Crown. The Ministry of Magic was underground. Harry had known this intellectually, Dobby had described it, the books had detailed it, He'd studied floor plans that the goblins had obtained through channels he hadn't asked about, but knowing and experiencing were different animals entirely. The visitor's entrance was a battered red telephone box on a grimy London street, and when Harry stepped inside and dialed 62442, the floor dropped away beneath him and he descended into the earth like a stone sinking through dark water. The atrium opened around him, and despite everything, the preparation, the confidence, the 3 years of hardening himself against awe, Harry's breath caught. It was enormous. A cathedral of polished dark wood and gleaming tile, the ceiling so high it vanished into shadow, with fireplaces lining both walls that roared green every few seconds as witches and wizards arrived for work. A fountain dominated the center, golden figures of a witch, a wizard, a centaur, a goblin, and a house elf, the magical creatures gazing adoringly up at the humans in a display of hierarchy so blatant it bordered on parody. Harry looked at it and felt the covenant burn cold against his chest. That fountain was coming down. Not today, but soon. Amelia Bones was waiting for him by the security desk. She wore formal robes of deep blue, the DMLE badge glinting at her collar, and her expression was the carefully composed mask of a woman about to walk into a war she intended to win. "Mr. Potter. Madam Bones. You look calm." "I am calm." The ghost of a smile. "Good. You'll need to be. Fudge has been here since 6 this morning. He's had meetings with at least 12 Wisengamot members, and the Daily Prophet has a full press contingent in the gallery." She fell into step beside him as they crossed the atrium, her heels clicking sharp against the tile. "He's also brought Dolores Umbridge." "Who?" "Senior Undersecretary to the Minister. Pink cardigan, face like a toad, voice like poisoned honey. She's Fudge's attack dog, handles the political dirty work he doesn't want his fingerprints on. She'll try to derail the session with procedural challenges. I've prepared counter-arguments for the 12 most likely ones." "Only 12. I was being conservative." Bones guided him past the fountain, through a set of golden gates, and into a lift that descended even further into the earth. "The Wisengamot chamber is on level 10. Courtroom 10, technically, though it hasn't been used for a trial in years. Full sessions are rare, most Wisengamot business is handled through committees. The fact that you've forced a full session has people nervous. Nervous people make mistakes. Nervous people also do desperate things." The lift shuddered to a stop. "Stay sharp, Mr. Potter." The corridor outside courtroom 10 was packed. Wizards and witches in plum-colored robes, the Wisengamot members, clustered in groups, speaking in low, urgent voices that died when Harry appeared. He felt the weight of their attention like a physical thing, dozens of eyes tracking him as he walked down the corridor, assessing, calculating, measuring. He recognized faces from his research. Augusta Longbottom stood near the doors, straight-backed and vulture-hatted, and gave him a nod that was nearly imperceptible but communicated absolute solidarity. Cyrus Greengrass, tall, thin, with Daphne's cool blue eyes, hovered near a group of neutral families, his expression carefully blank. Lucius Malfoy leaned against the far wall, silver-topped cane in hand, radiating the studied nonchalance of a man who wanted everyone to know he was above the proceedings while secretly being consumed by them. And at the center of the largest cluster, Cornelius Fudge. The Minister of Magic was shorter than Harry expected. Squat, round-faced, wearing a lime green bowler hat and pinstriped robes that strained at the buttons. He was talking rapidly to a small woman beside him, pink cardigan, broad face, wide mouth fixed in a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Umbridge. She looked, Harry thought, like someone who enjoyed pulling wings off flies and then writing memos about the experience. Fudge spotted Harry. His face went through a rapid sequence, alarm, anger, forced composure, before settling into a smile that was approximately as convincing as a paper mask. "Harry, my boy." He bustled forward, hand extended, voice pitched to carry. "What an occasion, what an occasion. I do hope this can all be sorted out quickly, terrible misunderstanding, I'm sure, Minister." Harry shook the offered hand briefly. I appreciate the full session. I know it's unusual. Unusual. Ha, yes, well. When the boy who lived makes a request, one can hardly refuse, can one? Fudge laughed, a staccato burst of false jollity that fooled no one in the corridor. Though I must say, this business with the, what is it, the covenant, I'm sure our legal experts will find it's all perfectly. The covenant has been authenticated by the Goblin Nation and verified by your own Department of Magical Law Enforcement, Harry said, pleasantly, loudly enough for the surrounding Wisengamot members to hear. But I appreciate your confidence in your legal experts. I look forward to their assessment. Fudge's smile calcified. Beside him, Umbridge's eyes narrowed, small, dark eyes that missed nothing and forgave less. Shall we go in? Harry said. Courtroom 10 was a dungeon. Not metaphorically, literally a dungeon, stone-walled and torchlit, with benches rising in tiers on all sides around a central floor. The Wisengamot members filed to their seats, plum robes rustling, and the gallery above filled with press and observers. Harry spotted Rita Skeeter in the front row of the press section, her acid-green quick-quotes quill already scribbling furiously. Harry's seat was on the central floor, at a small table that had been set up for the petitioner. The Covenant scroll lay before him, unrolled, its sigil glowing faintly gold in the torchlight. Beside it were Ragnarok's authentication documents, Bones's verification, and the 3 independent legal opinions. On the opposite side of the floor, Fudge sat at the minister's bench with Umbridge at his right hand and a team of legal advisors arrayed behind him like a wall. Above them all, in the Chief Warlock's elevated chair, sat Albus Dumbledore. Dumbledore brought the chamber to order with a tap of his wand. The murmuring died. This extraordinary session of the Wisengamot has been called at the request of 5 sitting members, Dumbledore said, his voice carrying effortlessly through the stone chamber, to hear and adjudicate a claim of sovereign authority under the founding covenant of the Ministry of Magic, as presented by Harry James Potter, head of the House of Potter and claimed heir of the House of Peverell. A ripple through the chamber. Whispers, quickly suppressed. Mr. Potter, Dumbledore continued, his blue eyes finding Harry's across the room, you may present your claim. Harry stood. He was 11 years old, 4 feet 9 inches tall, and wearing robes that Madame Malkin had tailored to fit him perfectly. He was the youngest person in the room by at least 40 years. And he was not afraid. Chief Warlock. Members of the Wisengamot. Minister. He let his gaze move across the chamber, making eye contact, holding it, moving on. 3 years ago, I discovered a document hidden in the home where I was raised. This document is the founding covenant of the Ministry of Magic, the original magical contract that established this institution and defined its authority, signed by the founding families of magical Britain over 3 centuries ago. He picked up the scroll. The covenant contains a provision called the Clause of Reclamation. This clause states that if the Ministry of Magic becomes, and I quote, corrupted beyond the consent of the governed, sovereign authority over the institution reverts to the bloodline of the covenant's primary signatory, the House of Peverell. Harry set the scroll down and placed his hand flat on the parchment. The sigil flared, gold light spilling between his fingers, and the chamber's ambient magic responded, torches brightened, the air thickened, and every witch and wizard in the room felt it. The covenant was awake, and it was listening. I am the last living descendant of the Peverell line, through my father James Potter and the Potter family's documented ancestry. This lineage has been verified by the Goblin Nation and confirmed by independent genealogical research. The covenant has been authenticated by Director Ragnarok of Gringotts personally, verified by the Department of Magical Law Enforcement, and assessed by 3 independent magical law practitioners, all of whom confirm its legitimacy. He paused. Let the silence build. Let them feel the weight of it. I am here to invoke the Clause of Reclamation and formally claim sovereign authority over the Ministry of Magic. The chamber erupted. Fudge was on his feet, face scarlet, shouting something about procedure. Half the Wisengamot was talking at once. The press gallery was a frenzy of scribbling quills and flashing cameras. Dumbledore had to fire 3 cannon blasts from his wand before order was restored. The petitioner has the floor, Dumbledore said firmly. Interruptions will not be tolerated. Chief Warlock, Fudge began. The minister will have his opportunity to respond. Mr. Potter, please continue. Harry continued. He walked them through the evidence, methodically, clearly, without rushing. The Covenant's text. The authentication documents. The legal opinions. The Peveril genealogy. He presented each piece of evidence calmly, answered procedural questions from the senior members with precision, and watched Fudge's legal team grow progressively more pale as they realized the ground they'd planned to fight on was dissolving beneath their feet. Then it was Fudge's turn. The minister stood, adjusted his bowler hat, and adopted the tone of a patient adult dealing with a precocious but misguided child. Members of the Wisingamat, what we've witnessed today is certainly impressive. Theatrical, one might say. But let us not lose our heads over a piece of old parchment and a boy's ambition. He paced the floor, hands behind his back, playing to the room. The Ministry of Magic has served the wizarding world for over 3 centuries. It has weathered wars, dark lords, and every manner of crisis. It has done so through elected leadership, through democratic processes, through the collective wisdom of this very body. And now we are asked to set all of that aside because a child, an 11-year-old child, however famous, has found a document that he claims gives him the right to rule. Murmurs of agreement from Fudge's allies. Harry sat quietly and let the minister talk. Let us examine this claim on its merits, Fudge continued, warming to his theme. First, the document itself. Yes, the goblins have authenticated it. But the goblins, with respect, have their own agenda. They have never been friends of the ministry, and validating a claim that destabilizes wizard governance serves their interests admirably. A sharper murmur. The goblin angle was effective, anti-goblin sentiment ran deep in wizarding Britain, and Fudge knew exactly which nerves to press. Second, the clause of reclamation. Even if the covenant is genuine, the clause requires that the ministry be corrupted beyond the consent of the governed. I ask you, is it? Are we corrupt? Are we failing our people? Fudge spread his hands, the picture of wounded sincerity. Crime is down. The economy is stable. We have enjoyed over a decade of peace since the fall of he who must not be named. Is this the picture of an institution requiring reclamation? More murmurs. Fudge was good at this, Harry noted. Not brilliant, but competent, he knew his audience and he knew which buttons to push. And third, Fudge's voice hardened. Third, and most importantly, we are being asked to hand the governance of magical Britain to a child. Not a trained administrator. Not an elected official. Not someone with any experience in governance whatsoever. An 11-year-old boy who has been at Hogwarts for 6 weeks. He turned to face Harry directly. I mean no disrespect to Mr. Potter. His parents were heroes. His survival of the killing curse was miraculous. But miracles do not qualify one to run a government. Fudge sat down to solid applause from his faction. Umbridge was beaming, her toad face alight with satisfaction. Dumbledore looked at Harry. The petitioner may respond. Harry stood again. He took a breath. And then he did the thing he'd been planning for 3 years, not a legal argument, not a political maneuver, but something simpler and more devastating. He told the truth. Minister Fudge asks if the ministry is corrupt, Harry said. Let me answer him. He reached into his robes and pulled out a folder, documents Dobby had helped him compile, information the goblins had verified, records that Amelia Bones had quietly confirmed. In 1981, following the fall of Voldemort, gasps. Flinches. The name hit the chamber like a slap. 12 accused Death Eaters were acquitted by the Wisingamat after making substantial financial donations to the ministry's post-war reconstruction fund. I have the donation records here, cross-referenced with the trial dates and verdicts. In every case, the donation preceded the acquittal by less than 2 weeks. Silence. Absolute silence. In 1985, the Department for the Regulation and Control of Magical Creatures passed legislation classifying werewolves as dangerous beasts, effectively barring them from employment, housing, and basic social services. The legislation was drafted by Dolores Umbridge. Harry glanced at the pink woman, who had gone very still, and sponsored by 3 Wisengamot members who simultaneously held financial interests in companies that produced anti-werewolf wards and detection equipment. I have the business registration documents. Fudge was gripping the edge of his bench. His legal team was frozen. In 1988, a proposal to grant house elves basic protective rights, limits on punishment, mandatory rest periods, the right to medical care, was defeated in committee. The committee chair, who cast the deciding vote against, received a new country estate from an anonymous benefactor 3 months later. I have the property transfer records. Harry set the folder on the table. I have 47 more examples. Shall I continue? The chamber was so quiet he could hear the torches crackling. Minister Fudge asks if the ministry is corrupt beyond the consent of the governed, Harry said. I would ask the governed. But the governed don't have a voice in this chamber, do they? The Muggleborns who are systematically excluded from positions of power. The magical creatures who are classified as property. The families who lost loved ones to a war and then watched their killers buy their freedom. His voice was steady, clear, carrying to every corner of the stone room. The clause of reclamation doesn't require my opinion on whether the ministry is corrupt. It requires the Covenant's judgment. And the Covenant is alive. It is magic. It cannot be fooled by speeches or donations or the appearance of stability. It knows what this institution has become. Harry placed his hand on the scroll again. If the Wisengamot doubts the Covenant's judgment, there's a simple test. The clause states that the bloodline verification and the corruption assessment are performed by the Covenant itself, through its own magic, in the presence of the full Wisengamot. The magic will either activate, confirming both my lineage and the corruption, or it won't. If it doesn't activate, I'll walk out of here and you'll never hear from me again. He looked at Fudge. Are you willing to let the magic decide, Minister? Or are you afraid of what it might say? The trap was elegant and Harry knew it. If Fudge refused the test, he looked guilty. If he accepted, the Covenant would do what it had been designed to do 3 centuries ago, judge the institution against its founding principles and find it wanting. Fudge looked at Umbridge. Umbridge looked at the legal team. The legal team looked at each other with the hollow expressions of people who had just realized they were standing on a trapdoor. The ministry does not recognize the authority of this so-called Covenant to judge, Fudge began. Point of order. Augusta Longbottom rose from her seat, vulture hat bobbing. The petitioner has proposed a magical adjudication, a test of the Covenant's claims through its own enchantments. This is consistent with established Wisengamot precedent. In 1743, the disputed inheritance of the Selwyn estate was resolved through magical adjudication of the founding documents. In 1812, the legitimacy of the Wizarding Banking Charter was tested through, yes, thank you, Madam Longbottom, Dumbledore interjected gently. The precedent is well established. The question before the Wisengamot is whether to permit the magical adjudication. He surveyed the chamber. All in favor? Hands rose. Harry counted, his heart steady. Augusta. Cyrus Greengrass, looking slightly ill but committed. The abbot's seat. Lucius Malfoy, raising his hand with theatrical languor. And then others, families Harry hadn't directly approached, families who'd read the legal notice in the Prophet, families who smelled blood in the water and wanted to be on the right side of history or simply wanted to watch Fudge squirm. The motion carries, Dumbledore said. Mr. Potter, you may proceed with the adjudication. Harry picked up the Covenant scroll and walked to the center of the chamber floor. Every eye was on him. The torches flickered. The stone walls seemed to lean inward, the ancient dungeon holding its breath. He unrolled the scroll fully and laid it on the floor. Then he drew his wand, holly, 11 inches, phoenix feather, and placed its tip against the golden sigil at the bottom of the parchment. I, Harry James Potter, heir of the House of Potter, last of the line of Peveril, invoke the clause of reclamation as set forth in the founding covenant of the Ministry of Magic. I call upon the covenant to verify my blood and judge this institution. The sigil blazed. Not the gentle glow Harry was accustomed to, this was a detonation of golden light that erupted from the parchment like a sunrise, filling the chamber from floor to ceiling. The Wisengamot members threw up their hands, shielding their eyes. The torches went out, unnecessary, the covenant's light was everywhere, warm and fierce and ancient, carrying with it the weight of centuries. Harry felt the magic move through him. It started in his chest, where the covenant had lived for 3 years, and spread outward, through his blood, his bones, his skin. It was testing him, reading him, confirming what it already knew. The warmth intensified, became almost unbearable, and then, a pulse. A single, massive pulse of magic that rippled outward from Harry like a shockwave, passing through every person in the chamber. He saw it hit them, saw Fudge stagger, saw Umbridge flinch, saw Dumbledore's eyes widen behind his spectacles. The covenant was reading them too. Reading the institution they represented. Judging it. The light shifted. Changed color. Where it had been pure gold, it now carried threads of something darker, crimson, black, the visual manifestation of the corruption the covenant was detecting. Harry watched the dark threads multiply, weaving through the golden light like veins through marble, and he felt the covenant's judgment crystallize, not as a thought but as a certainty, bone-deep and absolute. The Ministry of Magic was corrupt. The covenant had judged, and the verdict was undeniable. The light concentrated, pulling inward, gathering itself into a single blazing point above the scroll. Then it shot upward, through the ceiling, through the floors above, through the entire building, and Harry felt it connect with something vast and architectural, the foundational magic of the ministry itself. Ancient enchantments, embedded in the very stone and mortar of the building, awakened for the first time in 3 centuries. The walls hummed. The floor vibrated. And then, slowly, the light settled, sinking back into the scroll, dimming, fading, until the chamber was lit only by the torches, which had relit themselves, and the soft golden glow of the sigil on the parchment. In that glow, new text had appeared on the scroll. Words that hadn't been there before, written in the same ancient hand as the original text, blood verified. Corruption confirmed. Sovereignty transferred. So it is written. So it is bound. The silence in the chamber was total. Absolute. The kind of silence that follows an earthquake or an execution, the silence of a world that has fundamentally changed and doesn't yet know how to respond. Harry picked up the scroll. Rolled it carefully. Tucked it inside his robes. Then he looked at Cornelius Fudge. The minister's face was gray. Not pale, gray, the color of old ash, the color of a man watching his entire life crumble in real time. His bowler hat had fallen off at some point during the light show and lay on the floor beside his bench like a discarded prop. Umbridge beside him was gripping the bench with both hands, her toad face slack with shock. The covenant has spoken, Harry said into the silence. The verification is complete. The clause of reclamation has been invoked and fulfilled. He paused, letting the words land. As of this moment, I hold sovereign authority over the Ministry of Magic. The minister retains operational control of day-to-day governance, but major policy decisions, key appointments, and legislative initiatives require my approval. He looked around the chamber, at the stunned Wisengamot members, at the press gallery where Quickquote's quills were scratching so fast they were smoking, at Dumbledore's unreadable expression, at Augusta Longbottom's fierce satisfaction, at Lucius Malfoy's calculating eyes. I'm not here to dismantle the ministry, Harry said. I'm here to fix it. The institution is necessary. The people who serve it honestly are valuable. But the corruption ends today. The bought verdicts, the discriminatory legislation, the protection of the powerful at the expense of the vulnerable, all of it ends today. He let that sit. Then, I'll be establishing a transition council to advise on reforms. Madam Bones, I'd like you to chair it. We'll begin with a full audit of the Department of Magical Law Enforcement and the Wisengamot's legislative record. Details will be forthcoming. He picked up his folder and his documents and walked toward the chamber doors. The Wisengamot members parted before him like water, not from fear, exactly, but from the sheer bewildering reality of what they'd just witnessed. At the doors, Harry paused and looked back. Minister Fudge. You're welcome to remain in your position during the transition. Your experience with the day-to-day operations of the ministry is valuable, and I see no reason to waste it. A beat. But if I find that you're working against the reform process, obstructing the audit, or attempting to undermine the Covenant's authority in any way, I will remove you. And I won't be gentle about it. He walked out. Behind him, the chamber exploded into noise, shouting, arguing, the frantic scribbling of journalists, the thunder of a world rearranging itself. In the corridor outside, Harry leaned against the stone wall and let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. His hands were shaking. Not from fear, from adrenaline, from the aftershock of channeling magic older than the building he was standing in, from the sheer electric reality of what he'd just done. The door opened. Amelia Bones stepped out, closed it behind her, and looked at him. Well, she said. That was something. How bad is it in there? Fudge is being physically restrained by his legal team. Umbridge is drafting emergency motions. Lucius Malfoy is already positioning himself as your most loyal supporter, which you should be deeply suspicious of. And Rita Skeeter broke her quill from writing too fast and had to borrow one from the wizard next to her. Bones paused. The motion passed, Potter. It's done. You're the sovereign. Harry closed his eyes. Opened them. Then we have work to do. The weeks that followed were the most intense of Harry's life. He returned to Hogwarts that evening to find the castle transformed. News traveled fast in the wizarding world. The evening edition of the Daily Prophet had hit before dinner, and by the time Harry walked into the Great Hall, every student and teacher in the building knew what had happened. The silence that greeted him was staggering. 400 people, mid-meal, turning to stare at the 11-year-old who had just seized control of their government. Harry walked to the Gryffindor table, sat down between Neville and Hermione, and picked up a bread roll. Could someone pass the butter, he said. Neville passed the butter. Hermione handed him a stack of parchment covered in her handwriting. She'd been drafting reform proposals while he'd been at the ministry, and the stack was an inch thick. Ron, across the table, was staring at Harry with his mouth open and a forkful of pie suspended halfway to his face. You own the ministry, Ron said. That's the general idea. You own it. The whole thing. The building and everything. The authority, not the building. Though technically the building too, I suppose. I'll have to check. Ron put down his fork. His ears were very red, which Harry had learned was a Weasley indicator of extreme emotion. Bloody hell, Harry. Language, Ronald, Hermione said absently, not looking up from her reform proposals. From the staff table, Harry could feel Dumbledore's gaze like sunlight through a magnifying glass. Snape was staring at him with an expression of pure, undiluted loathing. McGonagall looked like she'd swallowed a live fish. Professor Quirrell, in his ridiculous turban, was not looking at Harry at all, which was somehow more noticeable than if he'd been staring. The Covenant pulsed, that same cold warning it had given before, sharp and specific, triggered by proximity to Quirrell. Harry had been tracking that warning for weeks, filing it away, waiting for the right moment to investigate. The ministry situation had consumed his attention, but he hadn't forgotten. Something was wrong with Professor Quirrell, and the ancient magic in Harry's chest knew it. After dinner, Harry convened what Hermione had started calling the Council, in the Room of Requirement. Neville, Hermione, and, for the first time, Daphne Greengrass, who had appeared at the room's entrance with the quiet declaration that if Harry was going to restructure magical Britain, he needed someone who actually understood how the pieces fit together. The Wisengamot session is just the beginning, Harry said, spreading his notes across the table the room had provided. The Covenant gives me authority, but authority without action is just a title. We need to move fast, reforms that are visible, immediate, and undeniable. Start with what people can see, Daphne said. She was perched on the arm of a chair, her Slytherin robes dark against the firelight. Political theorists call it a signal action, a visible change that communicates power and intent. Do something the old ministry would never have done, and do it publicly. The werewolf legislation, Hermione said immediately. Umbridge's 1985 laws. Repeal them. It's a clear moral position, it directly affects a marginalized population, and it sends a message that the new authority isn't going to continue the old discriminatory practices. It's also politically dangerous, Daphne countered. Anti-werewolf sentiment is deeply embedded. Push too hard, too fast, and you give Fudge ammunition. He'll paint you as a radical who's dismantling public safety. So we frame it properly, Harry said. We don't repeal the laws outright, we replace them. New legislation that maintains public safety measures for werewolf transformations but eliminates the employment and housing discrimination. Practical, reasonable, humane. Make it impossible to argue against without looking like a bigot. Daphne raised an eyebrow. That's good. Don't sound so surprised. She smiled, just slightly. I'm not. I'm impressed, which is different and far more irritating. Neville had been quiet, listening, and now he spoke. What about the Death Eater acquittals? The bought verdicts from after the war. The room went still. This was the nuclear option. Reopening the post-war trials meant directly confronting the most powerful pure-blood families in Britain, many of whom had bought their freedom and spent 15 years rebuilding their influence. Not yet, Harry said. That's the right thing to do, but it's a second-term move. We need to build enough political capital first. If we go after the old families now, before our position is secure, they'll unite against us. Fudge, Malfoy, families we haven't even thought of, they'll form a coalition and tear us apart. Malfoy's on your side, Neville pointed out. Malfoy's on Malfoy's side. He'll stay with us as long as we're winning and as long as we're not threatening his interests directly. The moment we reopen the Death Eater trials, he becomes an enemy. His father was one of the acquittals. Neville's jaw tightened. He didn't argue, but Harry could see the struggle, the boy whose parents had been tortured, being asked to wait for justice. Harry held his gaze. I promise you, Harry said quietly. We will get there. Your parents will have justice. But we have to be smart about the order of operations, or we'll lose everything. Neville held his gaze for a long moment. Then he nodded, once, and the steel in him, the steel Harry had recognized from the very first day, held firm. They worked until midnight, drafting the werewolf legislation reform, outlining the DMLE audit, planning the Transition Council's first session. Hermione's quill moved so fast it was nearly a blur, and Daphne's political instincts proved invaluable. She anticipated objections Harry hadn't considered, identified potential allies he'd overlooked, and translated idealistic goals into practical policy with the ease of someone who'd been raised at the intersection of power and pragmatism. When they finally broke, exhausted and exhilarated, Daphne paused at the door. Potter. Greengrass. This could work, she said. Not a compliment, an assessment. It could actually work. It will work. That's what I'm afraid of. But her eyes were bright, and the corner of her mouth was turned up, and she walked away down the corridor toward the dungeons with the purposeful stride of someone who just discovered a reason to care about something bigger than family positioning. The next morning brought the first counterattack. Harry was in potions. Snape had not acknowledged the ministry situation in any way, treating Harry with exactly the same hostile contempt as before, which Harry found oddly refreshing, when a ministry owl arrived with an official-looking scroll. Snape allowed Harry to read it with a sneer and a docked point 4, disrupting the academic environment. The scroll was from the Wisengamot's legal committee, signed by Dolores Umbridge. To the self-styled sovereign, the legal committee has initiated a formal review of the founding covenant's validity under the Magical Instruments Authenticity Act of 1867. Pending the review's completion, all actions taken under the clause of reclamation are suspended. The Transition Council is hereby dissolved. Any further attempts to exercise sovereign authority will be considered in contempt of the Wisengamot. Dolores Jane Umbridge Senior Undersecretary to the Minister Chair, Legal Committee. Harry read it twice. Then he folded it, put it in his pocket, and turned to Neville, who was watching him from across the potions table with barely contained fury. "She can't do that," Neville whispered. "The Covenant's magic already confirmed everything. You can't review what magic has already judged." "She knows that," Harry whispered back. "This isn't about legality. It's about delay. If she can tie the Covenant up in committee reviews and legal challenges, she can prevent any reforms from going through while Fudge regroups." "What are you going to do?" Harry smiled. It was not a particularly warm smile. "I'm going to go over her head." He wrote to Ragnarok that afternoon. The letter was brief. "Director Ragnarok, the Ministry's legal committee has challenged the Covenant's validity under a statute passed 500 years after the Covenant was signed. I need the Goblin Nation's formal position on whether post hoc legislation can override a pre-existing magical contract authenticated under Goblin law. I believe the answer is no, and I believe the Goblin Nation would be interested in establishing this precedent publicly. Your friend, Harry Potter." Ragnarok's response arrived the next day, hand-delivered by an armored goblin who strode into the Hogwarts Great Hall during breakfast with the casual confidence of someone who could not be stopped by mere wizards. The response was written on Gringotts letterhead, in gold ink, and addressed not to Harry but to Dolores Umbridge. "Madam Umbridge, the Goblin Nation notes with interest your committee's intention to review an instrument authenticated under our sovereign authority. We wish to clarify that Goblin authentication is not subject to review, challenge, or modification by any wizard legislative body, as established by the Treaty of 1403 and reaffirmed in the Gringotts Accords of 1612. Any attempt to invalidate Goblin authentication will be considered a breach of treaty and will result in the immediate freezing of all Ministry of Magic accounts held at Gringotts, the suspension of all galleon-to-pound currency exchange services, and the recall of all Goblin-made artifacts currently on loan to wizard institutions. We trust this clarifies the situation. Director Ragnarok, Gringotts Bank, London." The effect was seismic. Within 24 hours, Umbridge's review was quietly dissolved. The legal committee issued a terse statement that the Covenant's authenticity was not in dispute, and the Transition Council was reinstated. The Daily Prophet, which had been running Fudge-friendly coverage, suddenly discovered the virtues of balanced journalism now that the goblins were threatening to freeze everyone's bank accounts. Harry sent Ragnarok a bottle of aged fire whiskey, the most expensive one the Hogwarts house elves could source, with a note that read simply, "Thank you." The reply came back, "You owe me a favor. I intend to collect goblins." Harry smiled and filed it away. With the legal challenge neutralized, Harry moved fast. The Transition Council, chaired by Bones, with representatives from across the political spectrum, held its first formal session in mid-November, and Harry attended via a specially arranged flu connection from McGonagall's office. The session was contentious, productive, and exhausting, running 6 hours and covering everything from the DMLE audit to the werewolf legislation to a proposal for Muggle-born integration programs. But the reforms, however important, were only one part of Harry's world. He was still a student. Still an 11-year-old boy navigating his first year at a magical school. And Hogwarts, it turned out, had its own problems. The third-floor corridor. The Forbidden One Dumbledore had mentioned at the start of term feast with such suspicious casualness. Harry had been aware of it, had noted it, had filed it under, investigate when time permits. Now, as November turned to December and the political situation stabilized enough for him to breathe, he turned his attention inward. The Covenant had been warning him about Quirrell since day one. The cold pulse, the sharp edge of alarm, it never triggered around anyone else. And Harry had been observing the defense professor with the quiet, systematic attention he applied to everything. Quirrell was wrong. Not just nervous or incompetent, though he was both of those things on the surface. Wrong in a deeper way, a way that the Covenant's ancient magic could sense but Harry couldn't articulate. Like a note played slightly off-key, just enough to set the teeth on edge. He raised it with Dumbledore on a Thursday evening, in the headmaster's office, during one of their regular meetings. These had become a feature of Harry's Hogwarts life, weekly conversations that were part chess match, part therapy session, part strategic consultation. Dumbledore had accepted Harry's authority with a grace that was either genuine or masterfully performed, and their relationship had settled into something wary but functional. Mutual respect wrapped around mutual caution. Professor Quirrell, Harry said, seated in the chair across from Dumbledore's desk with a cup of tea he hadn't touched. Something's wrong with him. Dumbledore's expression didn't change. Not even slightly. And that, more than anything, told Harry that the old man already knew. What makes you say that? Dumbledore asked. The Covenant reacts to him. Every time I'm near him, the magic in the scroll goes cold. Warning cold. It doesn't do that with anyone else. Dumbledore set down his own teacup. The Covenant is very old magic, Harry. Ancient magic often responds to, let us say, disturbances in the natural order. That's not an answer. That's a deflection wrapped in wisdom. What's wrong with Quirrell? A pause. Dumbledore's blue eyes searched Harry's face, and Harry saw the calculation happening, the old man deciding how much to reveal, how much to withhold, balancing his instinct for secrecy against his growing respect for Harry's ability to handle truth. I have concerns about Professor Quirrell, Dumbledore said carefully. Concerns I have been monitoring since before the term began. I cannot share the specifics without potentially compromising an ongoing effort to, he's connected to Voldemort. The name hit the office like a thunderclap. Fawkes, Dumbledore's phoenix, ruffled his feathers on his perch. Dumbledore's face went very still. That's not a question, the headmaster said. No. It's a conclusion. The Covenant warns me about threats to its sovereign. The only living threat significant enough to trigger that response is Voldemort or something connected to him. Quirrell went to Albania last year, it's in his personnel file, which I accessed through the Transition Council's staffing review. Albania is where Voldemort was rumored to have fled after his fall. And the third-floor corridor that you so helpfully made forbidden, and therefore irresistible to every curious student in the building, is hiding something. Something you're using as bait. Dumbledore said nothing for a long time. The clock on his shelf ticked. Fawkes preened a tail feather. You are, Dumbledore said finally, the most remarkable 11-year-old I have ever met. And I have met several who went on to reshape the world. I don't need compliments. I need information. What's on the third floor? The Philosopher's Stone. A creation of my friend Nicholas Flamel. It produces the elixir of life and can transform any metal to gold. I moved it to Hogwarts for safekeeping after an attempted theft at Gringotts. Harry absorbed this. And you believe Quirrell, or whatever's riding him, is after it. I believe the remnant of Voldemort that survived his body's destruction is sustained by sheer will and dark magic, and that it has attached itself to Professor Quirrell as a host. The stone would allow Voldemort to create a new body. I have placed protections around it, and I have been watching Quirrell closely. You've been watching. Watching, while a man possessed by the darkest wizard in living memory teaches children. The words hung in the air. Dumbledore had the grace to look uncomfortable. The situation is more complex than, no, Harry said. It's not. You have a Voldemort-possessed teacher in a school full of children because you're running some kind of long game. You're using the stone as bait, probably trying to draw Voldemort into a position where you can confront or contain him. And you're willing to risk every student in this building to do it. The protections are extensive. No student is in danger, every student is in danger. Because Voldemort doesn't play by your rules, Professor. He never has. That's why he's terrifying. Harry stood. Here's what's going to happen. The Transition Council is going to conduct a security review of Hogwarts. That review will identify the threat on the third floor and require its removal. The stone goes back to Flamel or into a Gringotts vault under maximum security. And Quirrell is placed under surveillance by trained Aurors, not a headmaster who's trying to play chess with a Dark Lord. Dumbledore looked at him with an expression Harry had never seen before, a mixture of admiration, frustration, and something that might have been grief. You would use your political authority to override my judgment on matters of Hogwarts security? I would use my authority to protect students in danger. If you see those as the same thing, that says more about you than about me. The silence stretched. Then Dumbledore inclined his head, slowly, with a weight that conveyed both concession and warning. Very well. I will cooperate with the security review. But I must tell you, Harry, if Voldemort's remnant is forced out of Hogwarts, it will not simply vanish. It will find another host, another plan, another path to resurrection. You may solve the immediate problem and create a larger one. Then we'll deal with the larger one. But we'll deal with it honestly, in the open, with proper resources, not through secret gambits and acceptable risks. Harry left the headmaster's office and walked down the spiral staircase feeling the full weight of what he'd just done. He'd overruled Albus Dumbledore. The most powerful wizard in Britain, the man who defeated Grindelwald, the chief warlock of the Wizengamot, and Harry had looked him in the eye and said no. The Covenant pulsed warm against his chest. Approving, maybe. Or simply acknowledging that its sovereign was doing his job. The security review happened fast. Amelia Bones, upon learning that a Hogwarts professor was potentially hosting a Voldemort remnant, reacted with the controlled fury of someone whose entire career had been dedicated to preventing exactly this kind of insanity. She dispatched a team of senior Aurors to Hogwarts within 48 hours, led by a veteran named Kingsley Shacklebolt, tall, bald, calm, with the quiet competence of someone who'd seen enough to be surprised by nothing. Harry met Shacklebolt at the castle gates. The Auror looked down at him with dark, assessing eyes. You're Potter. I am. You're shorter than I expected. I'm 11. That would explain it. Shacklebolt's expression didn't change, but something around his eyes softened fractionally. Madam Bones briefed me. Possessed professor, dark artifact, potential Voldemort remnant. At a school. Full of children. That's the situation. Right. Shacklebolt turned to his team, 4 Aurors, wands drawn, faces grim. Let's go to work. The operation took 3 days. Shacklebolt's team swept the third-floor corridor, catalogued Dumbledore's protections, which were, Harry had to admit, genuinely impressive in their complexity, and secured the stone. The Philosopher's Stone itself was a surprisingly small thing, an irregular red gem that pulsed with an inner light, and it was removed to Gringotts under Goblin escort with enough security to guard a small country. Quirrell was the harder problem. The possessed professor, somehow aware that the net was closing, made his move on the second night, slipping through the castle in the small hours, headed for the third-floor corridor. Shacklebolt's team was waiting. Harry wasn't there for the confrontation itself. Bones had been very clear about that, and on this point Harry didn't argue. He was the sovereign, not a soldier, and throwing an 11-year-old at a Voldemort remnant was exactly the kind of thing he'd criticized Dumbledore for enabling. But he heard the story afterward, from Shacklebolt, over cups of tea in McGonagall's office. The man was inhabited, Shacklebolt said, his deep voice steady despite the weight of what he was describing. When we confronted him, the turban came off, and there was a face on the back of his head. A face. Harry's stomach turned, but he kept his expression neutral. Voldemort. What was left of him? A parasite, essentially, surviving by draining Quirrell's life force. When we engaged, the thing spoke through Quirrell's mouth. Offered us power. Offered us knowledge. It knew our names, our histories. It was, Shacklebolt paused, and for the first time, Harry saw something like unease in the man's professional composure. It was intelligent. Calculating. Even diminished to a shade clinging to a dying man's skull, it was the most dangerous thing I've ever faced. What happened? Quirrell collapsed when we hit him with containment spells. The Wraith, Voldemort's remnant, separated from his body. We couldn't capture it. The thing just screamed and fled. Through the walls, through the ceiling. Gone. Quirrell died shortly after. The room was quiet. Harry absorbed this. A man was dead. A man who had chosen to serve Voldemort, yes, but a man nonetheless. The first death connected to Harry's actions as sovereign. Dumbledore was right about one thing, Harry said. The remnant will find another host. Almost certainly. But now we know what we're dealing with. Madame Bones is establishing a dedicated task force, the Voldemort Remnant Investigation. Proper resources, trained operatives, full ministry backing. Shacklebolt looked at Harry with quiet respect. This is what you wanted, isn't it? The system working the way it's supposed to. This is exactly what I wanted. Shacklebolt nodded. Then he finished his tea, stood, and shook Harry's hand. You did good, Potter. You're 11, and you forced a room full of adults to act like adults. That shouldn't be impressive, but it is. December arrived, and with it, snow. Hogwarts transformed into a winter painting, towers capped in white, grounds blanketed, the lake frozen to a sheet of grey ice. The castle was warm, though, fires blazing in every hearth, and the mood among the students shifted to the particular excited energy of approaching Christmas. Harry sat in the room of requirement on a Friday evening, surrounded by his council, Neville, Hermione, Daphne, and for the first time in weeks, the topic wasn't politics. You should go home for Christmas, Hermione said. She was curled in an armchair with a book on magical constitutional law that she was reading for fun, because she was Hermione. Your parents, well, your family. Don't you want to see them? The Dursleys aren't my family, Harry said. And no. Then where will you spend Christmas? Here. Hogwarts. It's the closest thing to a home I've ever had. Neville was quiet for a moment. Then, I'm staying too. Gran's going to visit Mum and Dad at St. Mungo's, and I usually go, but this year I thought, he swallowed. I thought I'd stay. Harry looked at him. He didn't say anything sympathetic or reassuring, because Neville didn't need sympathy. He needed someone to understand. Stay, Harry said. We'll have Christmas here. I'll stay too, Hermione said immediately, closing her book. My parents will understand. I'll tell them I have important research to do. Do you? I always have important research to do. They all looked at Daphne. She raised an eyebrow. I'm a Slytherin. We don't do sentimental group decisions. That wasn't a no, Harry observed. It also wasn't a yes. But she was fighting a smile, and when she lost the fight, it was small and private and genuine. I'll think about it. She stayed. Christmas morning at Hogwarts was magic of the simplest, purest kind, not ancient contracts or political upheaval, but waking up to snow falling past the windows and a pile of presents at the foot of the bed. Harry had never had Christmas presents before. Not real ones. The Dursleys had given him a coat hanger and a pair of Vernon's old socks in his most memorable holiday haul. This year, there was a hand-knitted sweater from Molly Weasley, emerald green, with a golden H, sent because Ron had mentioned to his mother that Harry wasn't going home. There was a book on advanced defensive magic from Hermione. A rare plant cutting in a self-sustaining pot from Neville. A slim volume on pureblood etiquette from Daphne, inscribed, so you stop accidentally insulting people. DG. There was a box of Bertie Bott's every flavor beans from Ron. An ornate set of goblin-forged cufflinks from Ragnarok, with a note, for the Wizengamot. Look the part. And one more. A package with no card, wrapped in shimmering fabric that flowed like liquid silver through Harry's fingers. He held it up. A cloak, enormous, made of material that seemed to be woven from moonlight and shadow. When Harry swung it around his shoulders, he looked down and his body had vanished. An invisibility cloak. A note fell from the folds. Your father left this in my possession before he died. It is time it was returned to you. Use it well. No signature. But Harry knew the handwriting. He'd seen it on Hogwarts documents, on Wizengamot records, on the letter that had accompanied his Hogwarts acceptance. Dumbledore. Harry held the cloak and felt the Covenant stir, not with warning but with recognition. This was Peveril magic. Old Peveril magic. The cloak felt like the scroll, like the Covenant itself, carrying the same ancient, patient power. He wore it to the Christmas feast, not invisible but draped around his shoulders like a scarf, and when Dumbledore's eyes found him across the Great Hall, Harry raised his goblet in a silent toast. The old man's expression was complex, rueful, perhaps, or more. Actions continue. Chapter 4, Sovereign Spring came to Scotland like an apology, slow, uncertain, arriving in fits and starts between lingering grey skies and sudden bursts of warmth that made the Hogwarts grounds steam. The lake thawed. The forbidden forest shook off its winter silence and filled with birdsong and the distant crashing of things that were probably best left uninvestigated. Crocuses pushed through the earth around Hagrid's hut, and the castle itself seemed to exhale, settling into its stones like an old man easing into a favorite chair. Harry barely noticed. He was running on 4 hours of sleep, 3 cups of tea, and the particular manic energy of someone trying to simultaneously pass his first-year exams and restructure a government. You need to eat something, Hermione said, pushing a plate of toast across the Gryffindor table toward him at breakfast on a Monday in late February. Actual food, Harry. Not just tea and willpower. I ate yesterday. A bread roll at lunch does not constitute, fine. He took a piece of toast and bit into it without tasting it, his eyes still on the stack of parchment beside his plate. 3 Transition Council reports, 2 draft proposals from the Muggleborn Integration Office he'd established in January, a memo from Amelia Bones about irregularities in the Auror training program, and a furious letter from Dolores Umbridge protesting the Council's decision to audit the Senior Undersecretary's office expenses. The expense report alone was staggering. Umbridge had apparently been billing the Ministry for a truly heroic quantity of decorative kitten plates. The kitten plates are a symptom, Daphne said from behind him, appearing so silently that Neville jumped and nearly knocked over his pumpkin juice. She had perfected the art of infiltrating the Gryffindor table during meals, sitting down as though she belonged there, daring anyone to comment. Nobody did any more. The real question is what she's hiding underneath the expense padding. Nobody fights that hard to protect a budget line unless the budget line is covering something else. Harry looked at her. Such as? I don't know yet. But my father heard from his contact in the Administrative Services Department that Umbridge has been requisitioning resources from the Committee for the Disposal of Dangerous Creatures, resources that don't match any active cases. Hearing dates, execution orders, things like that. For creatures that may not actually exist. She's creating phantom cases to justify the committee's budget, Hermione said, her eyes going wide. Which means she's either embezzling funds or using the committee infrastructure for something unofficial. Daphne sat down properly, helping herself to a piece of Harry's toast. Either way, it's leverage. Harry turned to Neville. Can your grandmother put pressure on the Dangerous Creatures Committee? The Longbottom seat has oversight. She'll enjoy it, Neville said. Gran's been looking for an excuse to go after Umbridge since the werewolf laws. She calls her, that pink menace. Tell her to dig. I want everything, every requisition, every hearing date, every galleon. If Umbridge is running something off the books, we find it and we use it. The Umbridge situation was a slow burn, one of a dozen fires Harry was managing simultaneously. But it was the one that worried Daphne, and Harry had learned to pay attention when Daphne was worried, because Daphne's instincts for political danger were almost supernaturally accurate. The Morning Post brought more complications. An owl from Lucius Malfoy, they'd been corresponding regularly, a careful dance of mutual usefulness that Harry maintained with full awareness of its risks, requesting a meeting. The letter was shorter than Lucius's usual correspondence, which meant it was more important. Mr. Potter, a matter has arisen that requires discussion in person. It concerns the remnant investigation and information that has come to my attention through, let us say, historical channels. I will be at the Three Broomsticks in Hogsmeade this Saturday at noon. Bring your wand and your skepticism. You will need both. Harry pocketed the letter and looked at the staff table. Quirrell's chair had been empty since December, a conspicuous absence that the school had absorbed with the particular resilience of an institution accustomed to defense professors lasting about a year. The position was being covered by a rotation of existing staff, McGonagall on Mondays and Wednesdays, Flitwick on Tuesdays and Thursdays, and Snape on Fridays, which was universally regarded as the worst possible way to end a school week. But the empty chair was also a reminder. Voldemort's remnant was out there. The wraith that had fled Quirrell's dying body had vanished into the night and hadn't been seen since. Shacklebolt's task force had tracked it to Albania, again, always Albania, like a wounded animal returning to familiar territory, but the trail had gone cold in the mountain forests, and the investigation was stalled. Whatever Lucius had to say about it, Harry wanted to hear. Saturday at noon found Harry at the Three Broomsticks, which was nothing like the Hog's Head. Where the Hog's Head was dark and hostile, the Three Broomsticks was warm and bustling, packed with Hogwarts students on their Hogsmeade weekend, which Harry was technically too young to attend. He'd solved this problem by walking out the front gate, nodding to the security trolls the Transition Council had stationed there, and informing Filch the caretaker that the sovereign of the ministry didn't require a permission slip. Filch had spluttered. Harry had kept walking. Lucius was in a private booth at the back, screened by a privacy ward of considerable sophistication. He rose when Harry entered, a courtesy he extended to very few people, and which Harry catalogued as significant. Mr. Potter. Thank you for coming. Mr. Malfoy. Harry sat. Madame Rosmerta brought butterbeer without being asked. Your letter was cryptic. My letters are always cryptic. It keeps people interested. Lucius settled back into his seat, silver cane resting against the table. In the warm pub light, his pale features looked less aristocratic and more tired. The careful mask was in place, but underneath it, Harry could see the strain. Something was bothering Lucius Malfoy, and Lucius Malfoy was not a man who was easily bothered. Historical channels, Harry prompted. Lucius was quiet for a moment. Then he reached into his robes and withdrew a small object, a book, bound in black leather, worn and ordinary-looking except for the faint, residual hum of magic that Harry could feel even before he touched it. This, Lucius said, setting the book on the table between them, was given to me in 1981 by the Dark Lord himself. Shortly before his fall. He instructed me to keep it safe and to ensure it reached Hogwarts at the appropriate time. Harry didn't touch the book. The Covenant had gone cold in his chest, the same sharp, icy warning it gave around Quirrell, but deeper, more intense. Whatever this book was, it was bad. What is it? A diary. Tom Riddle's diary, from when he was a student at Hogwarts. Lucius's grey eyes were steady, but Harry caught the slight tension in his jaw, the way his fingers were curled tight around the handle of his cane. I've had it for 10 years. I was supposed to introduce it into the school, slip it to a student, let it do its work. I never fully understood what it would do, only that the Dark Lord valued it enormously. More than he valued most of his followers, certainly. And you're giving it to me. I'm presenting it to the sovereign as evidence of a potential threat, Lucius corrected. There's a difference. Is there? Politically? Yes. A considerable one. The ghost of a smile. If I simply gave it to you, I'd be admitting to possession of a dark artifact, which carries a minimum sentence of 5 years in Azkaban. If I'm presenting evidence to the sovereign authority as part of an ongoing investigation into the Voldemort remnant, I'm a cooperative witness acting in the public interest. You've thought this through. I always think things through, Mr. Potter. It's why I'm still alive. Harry looked at the diary. The Covenant's warning was constant now, a steady pulse of cold alarm that radiated from the book like heat from a fire, except the opposite. Whatever this diary contained, the Covenant recognized it as fundamentally dangerous. Why now? Harry asked. You've had this for 10 years. Why bring it to me today? Lucius was silent for a long moment. When he spoke, the practiced composure slipped, just fractionally, and underneath it was something Harry hadn't expected to see in Lucius Malfoy's face, fear. Because Draco wrote to me, Lucius said. He wrote about you. About what you're doing, how you're changing things. About the Covenant and the reforms and the way you looked at the Wizengamot when the golden light filled the chamber. He paused. My son admires you, Mr. Potter. He's trying very hard not to, because he's a Malfoy and Malfoys don't admire anyone, but he does. And it made me think, for the first time, perhaps, in a long time, about what kind of world I'm leaving for him. Harry said nothing. He waited. I served the Dark Lord, Lucius said, his voice dropping. Not because I believed in his cause, blood purity is a convenient ideology for maintaining power, but I've never been foolish enough to think it's literally true. I served him because he was powerful and I was afraid and the alternative was death. And when he fell, I did what I had to do to survive, bought my freedom, rebuilt my position, raised my son in the world I understood. The world of influence and leverage and political calculation. He looked at Harry directly. But you're building something different. Something that works. And that diary, he gestured at it. That diary is part of the old world. The Dark Lord's world. I've kept it for a decade out of habit and fear and the vague notion that I might need it someday. I don't want to need it anymore. The pub noise filled the silence between them, laughter, conversation, the clink of glasses. Two worlds, occupying the same space. The warm, ordinary world of a Saturday pub lunch, and the cold, dangerous world of dark magic and political calculation. I'll take it, Harry said. And I'll have it examined by the task force. Whatever it is, we'll neutralize it. There's something else you should know. Lucius leaned forward. The diary isn't unique. I believe the Dark Lord created several objects like it, objects imbued with a piece of his power. His essence. His soul, perhaps, though the magic involved goes beyond anything I understand. He referred to them once, in my hearing, as his safeguards against death. The Covenant pulsed so hard Harry felt it in his teeth. Soul magic. Objects containing fragments of Voldemort's soul. If that was true, if Voldemort had split his soul and hidden the pieces in objects, then the wraith haunting Albania wasn't just a remnant. It was an anchor point. A piece of a larger puzzle that, if assembled, could bring Voldemort back to full life. And Harry, with the Covenant burning cold against his chest, with the diary sitting on the table between them radiating malice, understood with perfect clarity why the ancient magic had found him. Why the founding Covenant had been hidden behind a stone in a cupboard under the stairs, waiting for a specific boy with a specific bloodline. The ministry wasn't just corrupt. It was compromised. The institution meant to protect magical Britain had been infiltrated, weakened, and hollowed out over decades, and the architects of that decay were Voldemort's servants, preparing the ground for their master's return. The corruption and the Dark Lord were not separate problems. They were the same problem. And the Covenant had known. Thank you, Harry said to Lucius. For the diary and for the information. This changes things. I rather thought it might. Lucius stood, collecting his cane. One more thing. Fudge is planning something. I don't know the specifics, he's been careful, cutting me out of his inner circle since I supported your Wizengamot session. But Umbridge has been meeting with people. Unusual people. Not politicians. Hired wands. Hired wands. Mercenaries. Private security. The kind of people you employ when you want something done that Aurors won't do. Lucius's expression was grave. Watch your back, Mr. Potter. Fudge is a coward, but Umbridge is not, and desperate people are dangerous. He left. Harry sat alone in the booth with his butterbeer going flat and the diary pulsing malice on the table and the weight of everything pressing down on his shoulders like a physical force. He was 11 years old. 11. And he was holding a piece of Voldemort's soul and processing intelligence about mercenary threats and trying to reform a government and pass his end-of-year exams, and he was 11. The moment lasted about 30 seconds. Then Harry picked up the diary, wrapped it carefully in his cloak, the invisibility cloak, which he'd started carrying everywhere, and stood up. 30 seconds of self-pity. That was all he was giving himself. There was too much to do. He walked back to Hogwarts through the February afternoon, the diary hidden against his chest next to the Covenant, two pieces of ancient magic in terrible proximity, one warm, one cold, one protective, one predatory. He could feel them reacting to each other, the Covenant's magic pressing against the diary's darkness like a hand pressing against a wound. Shacklebolt needed to see the diary immediately. Harry sent a Patronus message, a skill he'd learned from Flitwick in a private session, having demonstrated sufficient magical power to cast the charm despite being a first year. His Patronus was a stag, silver and enormous, which had made Flitwick fall off his stack of books, and McGonagall, who'd been passing in the corridor, burst into tears she refused to explain. The stag galloped through the castle walls, carrying Harry's message to the Ministry, and Shacklebolt arrived by Floo within the hour. They met in an empty classroom on the 4th floor, warded and sealed, with Dumbledore present at Harry's invitation, because whatever their differences, Dumbledore knew more about Voldemort than anyone alive, and Harry was not going to let pride get in the way of using that knowledge. Dumbledore examined the diary with hands that trembled. Horcrux, the old man breathed. I had suspected. I had feared. He set the diary down and looked at Harry, and his blue eyes were older than Harry had ever seen them, ancient, haunted, carrying the weight of decades of fighting a war that kept not ending. Do you know what a Horcrux is, Harry? A vessel for a piece of soul, created through murder. The ultimate safeguard against death. Harry paused. Lucius said there are more. If Tom created even one, he almost certainly created several. It would be, in character. He feared death above all things, and his arrogance would not have been satisfied with a single safeguard. Dumbledore's fingers hovered over the diary, not quite touching. This explains the Wraith. Even with his body destroyed, the Horcruxes anchor his soul to the mortal world. He cannot truly die while they exist. Shacklebolt's face was carved from stone. How do we destroy them? There are very few methods capable of destroying a Horcrux. Fiend fire, cursed fire, nearly uncontrollable. Basilisk venom, extraordinarily rare and lethal. The killing curse, applied directly to the container. And Dumbledore's gaze drifted to the wall, to nothing, to memory. And the sword of Gryffindor, which is goblin-made and therefore absorbs anything that strengthens it. If it were imbued with basilisk venom, it could destroy any Horcrux. Basilisk venom, Harry repeated. Where do we find basilisk venom? From a basilisk. And where do we find a basilisk? Dumbledore hesitated. Just a fraction of a second, barely perceptible, but Harry caught it. The old man knew something. Another secret, another piece of the puzzle he'd been hoarding. Professor. Dumbledore sighed. It was the sigh of a man who had spent a lifetime collecting secrets and was discovering, painfully, that the boy sitting across from him would accept nothing less than all of them. There is a chamber beneath Hogwarts, Dumbledore said. Built by Salazar Slytherin, one of the school's 4 founders. Legend calls it the Chamber of Secrets. Within it, according to those same legends, Slytherin left a monster, a basilisk, a serpent king. The chamber can only be opened by a parselmouth, a speaker of snake language. You've known about this, Shacklebolt said, his controlled voice carrying a dangerous edge, and you didn't. I have known the legend. I have not been able to confirm its truth, because I am not a parselmouth. Dumbledore's gaze shifted to Harry, and there was something in his eyes, expectation, perhaps, or the resigned awareness that what he was about to say would change the conversation entirely. However, Harry, I believe you are. The room went very quiet. Voldemort was a parselmouth, Dumbledore continued. The ability is exceedingly rare in British wizarding families, but it was a trait of the Slytherin line, and Voldemort was Slytherin's last descendant. When he attempted to kill you as a baby, the curse rebounded, but not cleanly. A fragment of Voldemort's power transferred to you. The scar on your forehead is its mark. Harry touched his scar. The thin, lightning bolt line of raised skin that had been part of him for as long as he could remember. The Covenant hummed, not warm, not cold, but something in between. Complicated. Conflicted. You're saying a piece of Voldemort is in me, Harry said. I'm saying a piece of his power transferred to you. Whether it constitutes a Horcrux or something else entirely, I cannot say with certainty. The scar has always been anomalous. Harry absorbed this the way he absorbed everything, quickly, thoroughly, without letting the emotional weight of it derail his thinking. He'd process the feelings later. Right now, there was a problem to solve. One thing at a time, he said. First, we destroy the diary. What method is available to us right now? Fiend fire, Shacklebolt said. I have 2 Aurors qualified to cast it. We can set up a containment in the Hogwarts grounds. Do it. Today. Harry turned to Dumbledore. Second, we locate the Chamber of Secrets. If there's a basilisk down there, we need its venom for the other Horcruxes. Can you help me find it? I have spent decades searching. The entrance has eluded me. Then we search together. I'm a parselmouth, if that's what it takes to open it, we'll need me anyway. He paused. And third, we start hunting the other Horcruxes. If Voldemort made several, we need to find them all. Every single one. Because until they're destroyed, he's immortal, and everything we're building, the reforms, the new ministry, all of it, is on borrowed time. Dumbledore looked at him for a long moment. Then the old man did something Harry had never seen him do, he bowed his head. Not deeply, not dramatically, but with the quiet gravity of someone acknowledging an authority he had spent decades believing should be his alone. You are right, Dumbledore said. On all counts. And I owe you more than cooperation. I owe you honesty. He raised his head. I have been playing a long game, Harry. A game I began when Voldemort first rose to power, a game I continued after his fall, a game I have been playing even now, with you, despite my growing respect for your abilities. I have withheld information, manipulated circumstances, and made decisions about your life without your consent, all in service of a plan that I believed was the only path to Voldemort's final defeat. The admission hung in the air. Shacklebolt stood motionless, his dark eyes moving between Dumbledore and Harry. I know, Harry said. You know. I've known since the night you tried to read my mind at the sorting feast. Harry's voice was calm but carried the particular edge of someone who had been patient for a very long time. I've known you were playing me since day one. The Blood Wards, the Dursleys, the Forbidden Corridor, the Stone, the Invisibility Cloak at Christmas, none of it was random. You were shaping me. Preparing me for something. A weapon you could aim at Voldemort when the time came. Dumbledore flinched. Actually flinched, as though the words had been a physical blow. That is, not inaccurate. Though I would argue, I'm not asking you to argue. I'm asking you to stop. Harry leaned forward. No more secrets. No more manipulation. No more chess games with people's lives. From this moment, we work together, openly, honestly, as equals. You have knowledge I need. I have authority you need. Together, we can end Voldemort for good. Apart, we'll spend so much energy maneuvering around each other that he'll come back while we're still playing games." Dumbledore was silent for what felt like a full minute. Then he smiled, and it was the saddest, most genuine smile Harry had ever seen on the old man's face. "Your mother," he said softly, "once told me almost exactly the same thing. In almost exactly the same words. I didn't listen then." He drew a deep breath. "I would like to listen now. Then we have a deal." They shook hands, an 11-year-old boy and a century-old wizard, in an empty classroom in a magical castle, sealing an alliance that would shape the future of the wizarding world. Shacklebolt watched from the side, and if his expression carried something like hope, he could be forgiven. Hope had been in short supply for a long time. The diary was destroyed that afternoon. Shacklebolt's aurors cast fiend fire in a containment circle on the Hogwarts grounds, and Harry placed the diary in the center and stepped back. The cursed fire, roaring, animal-shaped, hungry, consumed the diary in seconds. But before it died, the diary screamed. A high, thin, terrible sound that wasn't quite human, the death cry of a fragment of Tom Riddle's soul being ripped from its anchor. Harry felt it in his scar, a flash of white-hot pain that dropped him to one knee, and then it was over, and the diary was ash, and one piece of Voldemort's immortality was gone. Harry stood up, wiped the tears of pain from his eyes, and said, "One down." March arrived fierce and wet, and Harry threw himself into the dual tracks of his life with an intensity that worried his friends and impressed everyone else. School continued, exams approaching, lessons intensifying, the normal rhythms of academic life providing a grounding counterpoint to the extraordinary. In charms, Harry mastered the levitation charm's advanced applications, stacking and spinning objects with a precision that made Flitwick clap his hands with delight. In transfiguration, he pushed beyond the first-year curriculum entirely, working on second- and third-year material during independent study sessions that McGonagall supervised with the barely concealed pride of a teacher watching a prodigy fly. Potions remained adversarial. Snape had not softened toward Harry; if anything, the ministry situation had made him worse, adding political resentment to whatever personal grievance drove his hostility. But Harry had long since stopped caring about Snape's opinion. He brewed perfectly, answered correctly, and refused to rise to provocation, which seemed to infuriate Snape more than any argument could have. "Insufferable," Snape muttered one Friday, inspecting Harry's flawless forgetfulness potion. "Absolutely insufferable." "Thank you, Professor," Harry said pleasantly. 5 points from Gryffindor. Harry didn't blink. The political front was more turbulent. Fudge had gone quiet, too quiet, in Daphne's assessment. The minister had stopped making public statements, stopped fighting the reforms through official channels, stopped even attending transition council sessions. He was still technically in his office, still signing documents and meeting with department heads, but the bluster and resistance had evaporated, replaced by a compliance that made Harry deeply uneasy. "He's planning something," Daphne said at one of their evening sessions. "Fudge doesn't go quiet unless he's building something behind the scenes." "Lucius warned me about Umbridge hiring mercenaries," Harry said. "Private security. Non-ministry wands. That's not just concerning. That's illegal. The Ministry Security Act of 1911 prohibits the minister from engaging private military forces without Wisengamot approval. Which he doesn't have. But if he's doing it anyway." Daphne's expression was sharp, calculating. "He's preparing for a confrontation he doesn't expect to win through legal channels." "A coup?" Neville said. The word landed heavy in the room. Hermione's quill stopped moving. Neville's face had gone pale but set. "Not a coup in the traditional sense," Daphne said carefully. "Fudge isn't brave enough for open rebellion. But he might try something more subtle, a manufactured crisis, an emergency that requires temporary suspension of the sovereign's authority." Martial law, essentially, with Fudge as the emergency leader and his hired wands as enforcement. What kind of crisis? The kind you create when you're desperate. Daphne looked at Harry. He might stage an attack. Blame it on dark wizards, or magical creatures, or anything. Create enough fear and chaos that the public demands a strong hand, and then position himself as the only person who can provide it. Harry sat back and thought. The fire crackled. Outside the room of requirement, Hogwarts was quiet in the way a castle only gets late at night, the deep, settling silence of old stone. We need evidence, he said. Hard evidence of what Fudge and Umbridge are planning. Without it, we're guessing. I might be able to help with that. Everyone turned to Hermione, who had set down her quill and was wearing the expression she got when she'd been thinking about something for a long time and had finally reached a conclusion she wasn't entirely comfortable with. I've been studying the Ministry's internal communication system. All official correspondence passes through a central archive. It's a legal requirement, implemented after the First War to prevent exactly this kind of clandestine activity. The archive is supposed to be sealed and only accessible by the Chief Warlock for oversight purposes. But? Harry prompted. But you're the Sovereign. Your authority supersedes the Chief Warlocks in matters of institutional integrity. You could legally authorize an examination of the archive, specifically, any communications between the Minister's office and external parties that haven't been properly logged. That's surveillance, Daphne said, frowning. The optics, it's oversight, Hermione countered. There's a difference. And the legal framework is clear. Section 14 of the Ministerial Accountability Act gives the Sovereign explicit authority to audit communications when there's reasonable suspicion of. Okay, Harry said, smiling slightly at the familiar pattern of Hermione building a legal argument like a cathedral. Do it. Draft the authorization, cite the legal basis, and have Bones execute it. If Fudge is planning something, the archive will show it. The archive showed it. Not immediately. The examination took nearly 2 weeks, with Bones's most trusted analysts combing through months of communications, but when the results came back in early April, they were damning. Umbridge had been corresponding, through cutouts and intermediaries, with a private security firm called Wyvern Associates, headquartered in Nocturne Alley. The firm had been contracted to provide event security for an unspecified ministry function, with a budget that dwarfed anything a legitimate security detail would require. The communications referenced contingency planning, asset management, and timeline alignment, the sterile, euphemistic language of people who were very carefully not writing down what they were actually planning. More revealing were the communications between Fudge and 3 Wizengamot members who'd been among his most vocal supporters, the kind of messages that, stripped of their political pleasantries, essentially constituted conspiracy to commit a political coup. References to emergency powers, temporary suspension of abnormal authority, and, most chillingly, a discussion about the legal framework for having the Sovereign declared mentally unfit. They're going to try to have you committed, Amelia Bones said, her voice shaking with controlled fury. She'd come to Hogwarts for this meeting, sitting in McGonagall's office with the communications spread across the desk. They're building a case that you're an unstable child, influenced by dark magic, and that the Covenant's activation was a symptom of mental illness rather than legitimate magical adjudication. Can they do that? Neville asked from the corner. Harry had insisted his core group be present. Legally. They'd need a hearing before the full Wizengamot, which they don't have the votes for. But if they create enough chaos first, that manufactured crisis your friend mentioned, they might be able to push an emergency session through before the opposition can organize. When? Harry asked. Bones shuffled through the communications. The timeline references converge on April 23rd. This coming Thursday. 4 days. Harry had 4 days. What happens on Thursday? Hermione asked. There's a scheduled ministry open day, Bones said. A public event, tours, demonstrations, the annual Wizarding Public Services exhibition. Hundreds of civilians in the building. If Fudge's mercenaries create an incident during the event, mass panic, Daphne finished. Hundreds of witnesses to whatever crisis they stage. Fudge steps in as the strong leader. Emergency session of the Wisengamot that same evening, while everyone's still scared. Vote to suspend the sovereign. Done. The room was quiet. Harry looked at the communications, at the careful, cowardly trail of conspiracy that led from Fudge's office through Umbridge's intermediaries to a private army waiting in Knockturn Alley. He thought about the public servants who would be in the ministry on Thursday, the families and children visiting for the open day, the civilians who would be caught in whatever Fudge was planning to stage. "We're not going to let this happen," Harry said. "Obviously," Hermione said. "But how? We don't prevent it. We co-opt it." Everyone looked at him. Harry leaned forward, and the plan that had been forming in the back of his mind since Daphne first said the word coup crystallized into focus. Fudge wants a crisis. We give him a crisis. But not the one he's expecting. Harry pulled a blank sheet of parchment toward him and started writing. "Here's what we're going to do. Thursday, April 23rd. The Ministry of Magic was dressed for company. The atrium had been transformed for the open day, bunting and banners in ministry purple, demonstration stations along both walls where department representatives showed off their work, a temporary stage where the minister would give a welcoming speech. The golden fountain sparkled under enhanced lighting. The fireplaces roared with a constant stream of visitors, families, students, journalists, dignitaries. Harry arrived at 9 in the morning, through the visitors' entrance, wearing his best robes and the goblin-forged cufflinks Ragnarok had given him for Christmas. He walked through the atrium with his head up and his shoulders back, and the crowd parted for him the way it always did now, not from fear or deference but from the sheer gravitational pull of someone who moved through the world as though he owned it. Which, technically, he did. Amelia Bones met him at the security desk. She was in full dress uniform, the DMLE badge polished to a mirror shine, and behind her, casually dispersed through the atrium crowd, were 30 of her most trusted aurors. They wore civilian clothes. They carried concealed wands. They looked, to anyone not paying close attention, like visitors enjoying the open day. "Shacklebolt?" Harry murmured. "In position." The Wyvern Associates mercenaries entered the building 20 minutes ago, through the maintenance tunnels. We've identified 16 of them. They're dispersed through the lower levels, waiting. Fudge. In his office. He's been there since 7. Umbridge is with him. Harry nodded. And our other guests? Bones allowed herself the ghost of a smile. Arriving now. The fireplaces along the atrium wall flared green, one after another, and from each one stepped a member of the Wisengamot, not in civilian clothes but in full ceremonial robes, plum-colored and silver-trimmed, the formal dress of the magical legislature. Augusta Longbottom. Cyrus Greengrass. The Abbots. The Bones family seat, represented by Amelia's brother-in-law. The Diggories. The Macmillans. The Ogdens. Family after family, seat after seat, filing into the atrium with the quiet purpose of people who had been briefed and were ready. And behind them, last through the fire, moving with the theatrical precision of a man who understood that timing was everything, Lucius Malfoy. The Wisengamot members took positions throughout the atrium, mingling with the crowd, visible but not conspicuous. To the casual observer, it looked like a healthy turnout of magical government representatives at a public event. To anyone who knew what was about to happen, it looked like an army. At 10 o'clock, Cornelius Fudge emerged from the lifts and took the stage. He was sweating. Harry could see it from across the atrium, the sheen on his forehead, the way his hands fidgeted with the note cards for his speech. Umbridge stood beside him, pink cardigan and toad smile firmly in place. Fudge gave his speech. "Welcome, welcome, wonderful to see so many faces, the ministry is here to serve, proud tradition, continued excellence, blah, blah, blah." Harry listened from the back of the atrium and watched the clock. At 10:15, Fudge's speech ended. At 10:17, the lights in the atrium flickered. At 10:18, the mercenaries made their move. They came from the lower levels, 16 of them, wands drawn, faces masked, moving in coordinated pairs through the maintenance corridors and into the atrium's service entrances. Their instructions, as the intercepted communications had revealed, were to create a security incident, enough chaos and damage to justify an emergency lockdown, but controlled enough to avoid mass casualties. Scare the public. Give Fudge his crisis. They got about 4 steps into the atrium before Shacklebolt's auras materialized around them like ghosts. It wasn't even a fight. The Wyvern mercenaries were professionals, competent, trained, dangerous in ordinary circumstances. But they were facing 30 aurors who'd had 4 days to prepare, who knew exactly when and where the mercenaries would emerge, and who were operating under the command of the most efficient law enforcement officer in Britain. Stunners and binding spells flew in precise, coordinated volleys. The mercenaries went down like bowling pins, one after another, their wands clattering to the tile floor of the atrium before most of the crowd even realized something was happening. 16 mercenaries. 30 seconds. Not a single civilian harmed. The atrium went silent. The crowd, which had barely registered the confrontation before it was over, stared at the bound, masked figures on the floor with the dawning comprehension that something very serious had just occurred. Harry walked to the stage. He didn't run. Didn't hurry. He walked with the measured, deliberate pace of someone who had planned this moment down to the second, and the crowd parted before him and the Wisengamot members closed ranks behind him, and by the time he stepped onto the stage, Cornelius Fudge's face had gone the color of old porridge. "Minister," Harry said, his voice carrying through the atrium with perfect clarity. "Your mercenaries have been neutralized. Your plan has failed. The communications between your office, Dolores Umbridge, and Wyvern Associates have been recovered, documented, and authenticated." The silence in the atrium was absolute. 1,000 people, wizards and witches and their families, standing in the heart of their government, watching. "You conspired to stage a false crisis in a public building filled with civilians," Harry continued. "You planned to use that crisis to justify emergency powers and the suspension of legitimate sovereign authority. You hired private military forces without Wisengamot approval, in direct violation of the Ministry Security Act. And you did all of this, not to protect the people you're supposed to serve, but to protect your own position." Fudge's mouth was opening and closing like a fish. Umbridge had gone very still, her toad eyes darting to the exits, calculating. There were no exits. Bones's aurors had sealed every one. "Cornelius Fudge," Harry said. "As sovereign of the Ministry of Magic, I am removing you from the office of minister, effective immediately, on grounds of conspiracy, corruption, and gross dereliction of duty." You can't," Fudge sputtered. "I am the elected minister of," "You were the elected minister. Your election was under the authority of the ministry, and the ministry is under the authority of the Covenant. You violated both." Harry turned to Bones. "Madam Bones, please take the former minister and the former senior undersecretary into custody." Bones stepped forward. "Cornelius Fudge. Dolores Umbridge. You are under arrest for conspiracy to commit insurrection, misuse of public office, and endangerment of civilian lives. You do not have to say anything, but anything you do say may be given in evidence." Fudge looked like he was going to faint. Umbridge looked like she was going to explode. 2 aurors moved to either side of them, wands ready, and the former Minister of Magic was escorted off the stage and through the atrium in full view of 1,000 witnesses and the entire press corps. Rita Skeeter's quick quotes quill had actually caught fire from writing too fast. She didn't seem to notice. Harry turned to the crowd. 1,000 faces staring up at him, confused, frightened, hopeful, uncertain. He was 11 years old, standing on a stage in the heart of the government he'd claimed, surrounded by the evidence of a coup he'd prevented, and the weight of the moment settled on his shoulders like a mantle. "I know this is a lot," he said. "I know you came here today for a nice day out, and instead you got this. A ripple of nervous laughter. So let me be clear about what just happened and what happens next. He took a breath. Cornelius Fudge tried to stage a crisis to seize emergency powers. He failed because the ministry's own institutions, the DMLE, the Auror Corps, the Waisengamat, did their jobs. The system worked. Not because I forced it to, but because there are good people in this government who believe in doing the right thing, and they were given the tools and the authority to do it. He let that sink in. I didn't claim the covenant to become a dictator. I claimed it because the ministry needed someone to hold it accountable. A caretaker, not a king. And the best thing a caretaker can do is build something that doesn't need a caretaker anymore. He paused. I'm 11. I'm not going to pretend I have all the answers. But I have good people around me, and we're going to keep doing what we've been doing, reforming, rebuilding, making this institution worthy of the people it serves. A new minister will be elected. Properly elected, with full transparency, open to any qualified candidate. The sovereign's authority will remain as a check and balance, not as a replacement for democracy. He looked out at the crowd, at the faces of witches and wizards and their children, at the Waisengamat members in their plum robes, at the Aurors who just executed a perfect defensive operation, at the journalists scribbling furiously. The old ministry told you to be afraid. Afraid of names, afraid of change, afraid of each other. I'm asking you to be brave instead. Not the kind of brave that fights dragons, the kind of brave that demands better from the people in power. Hold us accountable. Ask questions. Show up. This is your government. It's time it acted like it. He stepped off the stage. The crowd was quiet for a moment, a single held breath, and then someone started clapping. Then someone else. Then a dozen people, then 100, and then the atrium was thundering with applause that echoed off the walls and the ceiling and shook the golden fountain. Harry walked through the applause and didn't stop until he'd reached a quiet corridor on level 2, away from the crowd and the cameras, where he leaned against the wall and closed his eyes and let himself shake. Neville found him there. His friend, his best friend, his first friend, the boy who'd shared a train compartment because everywhere else was full, stood beside him in the corridor and didn't say anything. He just put his hand on Harry's shoulder and stood there, solid and real and present. After a minute, Harry opened his eyes. How did it look? Like something people are going to remember for a long time, Neville said quietly. I think I need to sit down. There's a bench around the corner. They sat. The corridor was quiet. Somewhere above them, the atrium was still buzzing with the aftermath, arrests being processed, witnesses being interviewed, journalists fighting for quotes. Down here, it was just two 11-year-old boys on a bench, catching their breath. Your parents would be proud of you, Neville, Harry said. Neville's eyes went bright. He blinked rapidly, looked away, looked back. Yours too. They sat there for a while longer. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind. Fudge and Umbridge were formally charged and held for trial, a real trial this time, with proper evidence and transparent proceedings and no brown envelopes changing hands. The Waisengamat appointed a caretaker minister, Amelia Bones, who accepted with characteristic understatement and immediately began implementing reforms that Harry's transition council had been developing for months. The Wyvern mercenaries were identified, charged, and traced back to their financiers. The trail led to several familiar names, old pureblood families who'd been Fudge's silent partners, who'd profited from the old corruption and resented the new transparency. Arrests followed. Assets were frozen. The message was clear, the old way of doing business was over. And through it all, exams approached with the inexorable certainty of a natural disaster. You realize, Hermione said, sorting through a stack of revision notes in the room of requirement that was taller than she was, that we still have to pass first year. Saving the government from a coup doesn't exempt us from the transfiguration practical. I've been studying, Harry protested. You've been reading political briefings during herbology. Professor Sprout told me. I was multitasking. You were growing the wrong plant. You grew a venomous tentacula instead of a bouncing bulb because you were reading a memo about pension reform. Neville snorted. Daphne, who had fully abandoned any pretense of not being part of their group and was curled in her usual armchair with a potions textbook, covered her mouth with her hand. Fair point, Harry said. All right. Exams first. Government reform after. They studied. They revised. They quizzed each other on spell theory and potion ingredients and the dates of goblin rebellions, which Harry, courtesy of his relationship with Ragnarok, knew from the goblin perspective rather than the wizard one, leading to several spirited arguments with Hermione about historical objectivity. The exams themselves were almost anticlimactic. After a year of political warfare, ancient magic, and preventing a governmental coup, turning a mouse into a snuff box felt like a rest. Harry passed everything with top marks. Hermione beat him in 3 subjects, which she was extremely gracious about, which meant she only mentioned it 4 times. On the last day of term, Harry sat in the great hall for the leaving feast and looked around at the world he'd built. Neville beside him, confident and steady, the boy who'd arrived on a train too nervous to breathe and was leaving as someone who'd helped reshape a government. Hermione on his other side, brilliant and fierce, already planning next year's legislative agenda. Ron across the table, loyal and brave and still slightly confused about how his life had gotten this complicated. And at the Slytherin table, Daphne caught his eye and raised her goblet, a small gesture, private, carrying the weight of a partnership that had begun with a conversation in a library and grown into something neither of them had expected. At the staff table, Dumbledore rose for his end-of-year speech. The old wizard looked different than he had at the start of term, lighter, somehow, as though the weight of his secrets had been partially lifted by the act of sharing them. His eyes found Harry's across the hall, and the twinkle was there, genuine this time, warm with a respect that had been earned rather than assumed. Another year ends, Dumbledore said. And what a year it has been. I will not pretend it has been ordinary, because it has been anything but. This year, we have witnessed extraordinary courage, extraordinary intelligence, and extraordinary heart, from sources both expected and unexpected. His gaze lingered on Harry. I am an old man, and old men are often set in their ways. We believe we know best, because we have seen so much. But this year, I was reminded that wisdom is not the exclusive province of age, and that sometimes the bravest thing one can do is not fight the darkness oneself, but trust others to fight it alongside you. He raised his goblet. To the students of Hogwarts. To their future. And to the world they are building, which, I suspect, will be rather better than the one my generation left them. The hall erupted. Cheering, clapping, stamping feet on the ancient stone floor. Harry clapped with them, and felt the Covenant pulse warm and steady against his chest, and allowed himself a moment of simple, uncomplicated happiness. It wouldn't last. He knew that. Voldemort was still out there, diminished, disembodied, but anchored to the world by Horcruxes they hadn't found yet. The reforms were underway but far from complete. The new minister would face challenges, the old power structures would resist, and the wizarding world would not be transformed overnight. But the foundation was laid. The tools were in place. The people were ready. Harry boarded the Hogwarts Express the next morning, found a compartment with Neville and Hermione and Ron, and watched the castle disappear behind the hills as the train carried them south. The countryside rolled past the windows, green and gold and alive with the reckless energy of early summer. So, Ron said, unwrapping a chocolate frog. What are you going to do over the summer? Harry thought about the Horcrux hunt he and Dumbledore were planning. About the new ministry elections that would need oversight. About Remus Lupin, who'd written to say he was coming to visit next week and bringing photographs of Harry's parents. About the Dursleys, whom he would not be returning to, the Covenant's protection superseded the Blood Wards now, and Harry had arranged to spend the summer at Potter Manor, the family estate in Gloucestershire that the goblins had been maintaining for a decade. He thought about the diary, Ash in the Wind. About the wraith in Albania, hunted by professionals. About the other Horcruxes, hidden in places he would find. About Voldemort, who had once been an orphan boy named Tom Riddle, who had feared death so greatly that he'd torn his own soul to shreds to avoid it, and who would learn, eventually, inevitably, that the boy he tried to murder had become the most powerful person in magical Britain and was coming for every piece of him. Harry leaned back in his seat, watched the English countryside stream past, and smiled. "I'm going to save the world, Ron." "Obviously." Ron looked at him, looked at Neville and Hermione, and shrugged. "Yeah, all right. Past the chocolate frogs?" The train rolled south. The sun was warm. And Harry Potter, the boy who lived, the heir of Peveril, the sovereign of the Ministry of Magic, 11 years old and unstoppable, rode toward summer with his friends beside him and the future wide open ahead. He pressed his hand against the covenant, felt it pulse one final time, warm, certain, alive, and closed his eyes. The world was broken. He was going to fix it. And he was just getting started.